everybody doing? Can you hear me okay?
Good.
Good. How's the studying going? You finding your groove? Sometime the right place people leave you alone? Hopefully so. Sorry, I'm getting my other login going here. So we talked about a couple of big topics last week, and let's do a little bit of review there. One thing we talked about were the types of multiple ownership, concurrent ownership, and that had some pretty fun terminology that you just don't see every day. What's the name of the thing? What is it called when somebody owns property by themselves? What kind of ownership is that when they own it by themselves?
Inseveralty.
Now, be careful because that word is tricky. But you're right. You're right. I totally was blanking. Yeah, severalty. Sever meaning one. So you're right. Exactly right. What's it called when more than one person owns property?
Joint tenancy.
That's one version of it. What's the
Concurrent ownership.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you, Alfred. So yeah, concurrent ownership is the one that gets pretty deep. Inseveralty can be tricky, and bulk of this chapter was about the multiple types of ownership. Sorry, I'm going to get this thing squared away in just a second. Okay, here we go. Now I can show you some stuff. Do a little review. I like to do a little bit of review at the start of every class. There we go. Okay. So here's our severalty. There's our concurrent. And so these are the three kinds of concurrent ownership. The test question will give you a scenario and then ask you.
Are you actually sharing your desktop?
Say again?
Are you sharing your desktop?
Oh,
I wouldn't
yeah,
see.
sorry. There
Yeah, we
I
don't
just
see
started
it.
the video. Okay, good. It wasn't much to look at till just now anyway. So there we go. So the test question will give you a scenario and then ask you how that ownership needs to be. One example we saw that you guys did great with last week was if three people own as tenants, as joint tenants, then one of them leaves in their will that if they pass away, the property is going to go to their spouse and or children. What's going to happen when they do die? If they own with those other people as joint tenants, are they going to own? Are they going to successfully get that property, leave it to their heirs? Or are they going to own it, or will those remaining owners now share 50-50 instead of a third each?
Yeah, the remaining owner is going to share 50-50 because the right of survivorship won't allow the heirs to inherit it.
Perfect. You even got my next question. Right of survivorship is the key to joint tenancy. It's also the main characteristic of what other kind of tenancy? What other kinds of these three tenancies has right of survivorship or features it?
Tenancy by the entirety.
Exactly. And who is it that uses this method? What kind of people?
Married couples.
Married couples. Spouses use tenancy by the entirety. In fact, let's say it a certain way. Only spouses can use tenancy by the entirety, but that's not the only kind they have to use, right? Spouses can choose which kinds of ownership here. What's available to spouses?
Tenants in common.
Yep. That's another one. Tenancy by the entirety, tenancy in common. What else, if anything?
I believe all of these are.
Perfect. You got it. Any of them. Spouses can use any of them. What would be a scenario where spouses might not want to use tenancy by the entirety?
Divorce.
Okay. Maybe they still want to own together, but they get a divorce. That would be unique. That'd be a pretty impressive relationship. But I've known people that were amicably divorced. How about maybe one of them is into real estate investment and they, for whatever reason, want to turn this into an investment property, and it could be anything. It could be that they are both second spouses to each other, so they both have adult kids. And so maybe they do want to have the freedom to, maybe this isn't like their only property, or maybe they bought it together as a beach condo. For whatever reason, they want to leave their share to their kids if one of them were to die. If that's what they want to accomplish, then tenancy by the entirety will not work for them. They're going to have to pick tenancy in common so that they can leave to whatever heirs they might want to, if right of survivorship is not important to them. This is tricky, though. People need to be educated on what these things mean, because what if it's a dating situation, boyfriend and girlfriend situation, and they buy this thing together as tenants in common, but they don't like each other's parents, and then one of them passes away, insult to injury, their partner has passed away, but now they are co-owners with the heirs of their partner. And when they're not married, no right of survivorship, it's tenancy in common. The partner's next in line, if they don't have kids, next in line is parents in the order of lineage. I think then it's siblings, and then I think it goes out from there. So it could get tricky. And as our job as real estate agents, if somebody were to ask, which way should I pick? What would be a good answer for us to give if they say, what's the best way to own property? And they're asking us. Think safest answer. Is this a real estate question, or is it a legal question they're asking you? This is a legal question, right? We're teaching it to you in a real estate.
Freehold,
sir.
Would it be freehold the best way to own?
Oh no, I was asking. Sorry, I asked the question poorly. If they were to ask us what our opinion is as to how they should own property, whoever they are, if your client says, "Hey, Alfred, what do you think we should do in terms of how we should own this property? Should we pick tenants in common, joint, or tenants by the entirety?" What would be an answer to a client who asks your opinion on how they should own this property? Think dodgeball. You don't answer this question, right? This is out there in the wild. This is a legal question. It's in this course because we're showing you how this thing works. But this is the kind of thing among many things they could ask that you don't answer. Your go-to answer on something like that is going to be, "Oh, I'm sorry. I can tell you what these three things mean, but as to what you should choose, let me connect you with a great attorney who will give you legal advice." Because the ownership on the deed of this thing is indeed, didn't mean to use that word, legal advice. They're asking you for legal advice. Just like if they ask you about, we'll get into this at some point later, capital gains exclusions and 1031 tax deferred purchasing for investment property, all that sort of thing. Talk to your CPA. I can help you with the real estate, but I can't give you opinions on if you should do these things or how, what I can tell you what these things mean, what they are, but I can't give you legal advice. You have to be careful. And on this test, in this course, they like to test you on giving legal advice and not doing it. We can't do it. We saw it in the comments section. Not allowed to give legal advice. What else? Let's see. Where are we? Here we go. There it is. So we know this. Let's recap tenancy by the entirety. It's for married people, but married people don't only have to pick it. They could choose any of the others. If you don't tell the attorney to the contrary, they're going to assume the married spouses want this method. So attorney's going to write it up this way unless you say specifically otherwise. It's you can't sue your spouse to force them to sell so you can get your portion out. That's not allowed for this method, but it is allowed for those other two at the top. Those two allow it. Tenancy by the entirety does not. Both have to sign in order to sell. What if only one of them is on the deed? What if they bought it when they were by themselves in severalty, and then you get married? You didn't add the second person to the deed, but then you go to sell it. You want to sell it. Who has to sign to sell the property?
Both.
Both of them.
The other spouse.
Yeah. There's a story another educator talks about, and he said his best friend was going to Vegas with his girlfriend, and he had listed the property. It was under contract, and they just needed to come back on Monday for the closing. Actually, no, they didn't want to come back Monday for the closing. He gave him, my educator friend, power of attorney to sign for him on the closing, at the closing on Monday. So on Saturday, they got to Vegas. He called my buddy, his buddy, and he said, "Oh, got some good news." And his friend said, "What? Did you win a bunch of money, in the casino?" And he said, "No, we got married. Went to the Chapel of Love. Elvis got us married." And his friend said, "Oh, okay. Well, you planning on coming back for closing on Monday?" And he said, "Well, no, I went ahead and signed over power of attorney to you, got everything lined up, made sure I could do that so we could take all week and be here in Vegas." And his friend said, "Well, that worked great while you were the owner, but you just changed that today. You're no longer the only owner. And what I have as a power of attorney is to sign for you, not for her. So congratulations on getting married. You better fix this. You either need to come back and go to closing so she can sign, or maybe we could work something out and get some, but on the weekend, you can't just get any old power of attorney. The attorneys don't work on the weekend. You'd have to get another power of attorney from her to let this real estate agent sign for her too." And long story short, they came back Sunday and went to the closing on Monday so she could sign, because she was the new owner alongside her new husband. So that's how important it is. And in this business, you don't want to set this thing up for us. You want to be well aware of who are the parties, right? Ask questions. Make sure you know who needs to sign. If you're married, you need to sign. Let's see. And then we got into tenancy in common. So while tenants by the entirety is the most popular, most typical for married people, tenancy in common is the most typical for unmarried people. It allows not owning equally. So you could be a co-owner with two other people, like in the picture here, and you guys maybe put different amounts of down payment. You don't want to own it 33, 33, 33. You want to own it 20, 30, 50, or some other uneven amount for whatever reason. This allows for it. Joint tenancy does not. In joint tenancy, the ownership is equal. Now, I say that, and that's all you need to know for the test. But in real life, these things are a little bit more flexible. You can actually accomplish more things. Just tell the attorney what you want to accomplish, and they'll write it up. In North Carolina, it's either probably going to be tenancy in common or tenancy by the entirety, because to use joint tenancy, it requires very specifically written legal language. And if anything is wrong in the language on the deed, that joint tenancy is not what you've accomplished. So it just tends to not be used that much. For tenancy in common, you can also buy at separate times and still be a tenant in common. What if you buy at the same time and you're a joint tenant, but then later one of them sells to someone else? Then that person didn't buy at the original time. Therefore, they can't also be a joint tenant. They like to ask you this one. Does that make sense? Joint tenancy only works if you're buying at the same time. So in this case, Oscar would not be a joint tenant because he bought it from Toby. Toby was an original purchaser. Oscar was not. Oscar's going to be a tenant in common. How does that matter? It doesn't. It doesn't really all that much, most likely. Now, speaking of that, though, Oscar owns it as tenant in common. Let's flex and take this a little step further. Could Oscar leave his portion to his spouse and kids?
Yes.
Yeah. Pam and Jim can't, right? Say that they're not married. Say that they have separate spouses and kids. If either of them die, then the other one's going to be the surviving owner, but Oscar would still be in the mix. Oscar dies, Oscar can leave it because his ownership isn't joint. So just be able to navigate that and work your way through it. We talked about the type of property. Those were how many people are owning it and how they could own it. This is the types of property. And so hybrid forms of ownership, there were 4. Doesn't get too detailed here. You need to know the difference between condos and townhouses, for one thing. What do you own if you own a condo? How much of the property, what portion of the property is yours?
Airspace in between the walls.
Perfect. Yep. Not the what? Not the
actual building.
Well, yeah, but like think what it's sitting on. That was
not the land.
Yeah, terrible question. So I appreciate your being smart enough to figure out my mystery question. But the dirt, right? The condo doesn't include the land, the dirt. That's a big difference between condos and townhouses. The other question they'll ask you with condos is, what about the pool, tennis, gym, clubhouse, the common areas? Who owns the common areas in a condominium?
Everyone shares it as tenants in common.
Perfect. You got it. So that's a big one. You own the unit fee simple of some sort. Could be fee simple to feasible, by the way. Let's not go there yet. The rest of it, tenants in common. And that common elements could also include additional extra ones that some owners, not all owners, pay extra for: boat slip, storage, garage, something like that. How about if you buy a condominium, look out, trick question alert. If you buy a condominium that was built in 1986 and you get cold feet, you get buyer's remorse, and the next day you want to back out of the sale, so we're within 7 days of having bought it, what options do you have? Any sort of a leeway? Do you have any sort of way to get out of this contract?
Yeah, the right of rescission.
You don't, because the 7-day right of rescission only applies to new construction.
Alfred is batting 1,000. No tricks are getting by him today, because exactly right. And I used the year 1986 to be a big jerk and try to trick you. It has nothing to do with the year built, guys. And
you got me with that one before. That's why I remember it.
Yeah, so it just happens that the Condo Act was the legislation that happened in 1986. So the North Carolina Condo Act just says, hey, for new construction condos, like Alfred said, you have 7 days to back out. But not anything else, just new construction ones. So keep that in mind. What else is in the Condo Act of 86? They've got to record a plat map. They have to record a declaration basically saying, here's the project, here's what it's going to include, and some sort of an owner's association. But the main thing they see tested is 7-day right of rescission for new construction condos in North Carolina. You might want to write it down. Go ahead.
Is there a timeline on the new construction part of it?
What do you mean?
Like what would be classified as new construction?
Like built like it never existed before. This will be the very first owner who ever lived in it, because it was built from scratch. Yeah. It never existed. So like, say we're in the mountains or something and they clear some trees and they build it up out of the ground, takes like a year, and they finally get all the whole complex done. That's new construction. Never before occupied. Good question.
So is this just for North Carolina? Yes. Or is it national?
North Carolina. This would show up on the state portion of the exam, because this is what is handled and decided under the North Carolina Condo Act. Another good question. So expect this question on the state exam, not the national portion, but the state portion. What about if I had asked you that same question, but instead of the word condo, I said, a townhouse was built in 1986. Do you have 7 days to back out? No. What if I also instead said a townhouse was brand new Brand new townhouse built from dirt, from the ground. Do you have 7 days to back out of it?
No, I don't think so.
No, because that's not a condo. So therefore, what was the difference between a condo and a townhouse again? What are a couple of the differences?
Vertical and horizontal ownership.
Nice. Perfect. Condos, horizontal, airspace, wall to wall, painted surface to painted surface, whereas the townhouse includes vertical down to the land, to the dirt. Yeah. What if the thing that you're looking at, the property, ignore the words, but that property you drive up and it looks like that? Is it 100% always going to be a townhouse? There's a garage. There's the unit itself. It looks like a courtyard in the back with the fence. Is it definitely a townhouse? Because of how it looks. And the answer is no. Townhouse versus condo is how they choose to handle it and consider it. It could be that the garage space is a limited common area and it goes along with this unit, so this unit costs more, but that living space, you own just the painted surface. You don't own the dirt. And as hard as that is to wrap your head around, when you're selling stuff out there in the world, you need to realize that this could have been some weird anomaly kind of thing where the developer chose to build this thing and handle it like condos instead of townhouses. So just because it looks like it's including the land, you need to ask questions and find out if it does. Because the financing could be affected and the HOA and how all that's handled. What if in a townhouse, when it is a true townhouse, how do they handle the common areas? Who owns the common areas with a townhouse community?
The HOA.
The HOA, not all the owners as tenants in common. So it's the space that you actually own, and it's how the common areas are handled. Those are the two big differences between condos and townhouses, and leave the possibility that it could look like one thing but be handled as another. And then we got into something we don't see much at all in North Carolina, and that's co-ops. What do you own when you own a co-op? Is it fee simple, absolute, or something like that?
I think you just own stock, correct?
Yep. It's two pieces there. It's a lease, a proprietary lease to occupy that unit so that your neighbor can't just come into your unit, right? You each have your own access to your own individual spot inside the building, but then also a stock certificate instead of the deed. So if they mention stock certificate instead of a deed, you're going to immediately think co-op, cooperative. But it also requires a proprietary lease. And then finally, what about timeshares? What were the numbers associated with the definition of a timeshare? What makes it a timeshare in North Carolina?
555.
You got it. Yep, 555-10-5. So we have the right to occupy it at least 5 times over the course of 5 years, given. Oh, and that's, look for, I need to put the words at least in there because they might test you and say, so-and-so has the right to occupy this condo at the beach 3 times over the next 5 years. Is it being handled as a timeshare or not? Or does it qualify as a timeshare? Maybe I should say unit instead of condo because saying condo is confusing in this topic. And you would immediately think, oh, that's not 5. That's not at least 5. They said 3. It needs to be at least 5 in order to be considered and handled as a timeshare. At least 5 times over 5 periods or 5 years. They have a 5-day right of rescission for timeshares. Does that have to be a new timeshare? Brand new? We saw a right of rescission for condos, and it had to be a new condo. That does not matter for timeshares. So there were 2 kinds of rights of rescission. For new construction condo, you get 7 days. For timeshares, not new necessarily, just timeshares period, you get 5 days. And in order to be able to give you your money back, developer has to hold the earnest money for 10 days. That's a requirement of the developer. And then also, here's the one kind of real estate licensee that could be fined by the Real Estate Commission. And they could be fined $500 per violation of the Timeshare Act. We talked about liens. That was another big one. Voluntary liens versus involuntary. Happy versus sad. You chose to put the voluntary lien on it because you got a mortgage and you wouldn't have been able to pay cash with it. So you needed the mortgage. So therefore you did it on purpose. The involuntary lien was because something didn't go well, because you didn't pay your taxes, because you didn't pay the mortgage. Somehow or other, they're exercising their right to foreclose, for instance, or putting a lien against the property. And then things that could involve your property are in two big categories of specific liens, which have hierarchy over general liens. The specific liens get paid before the general liens do. Let me find there it is. So in the order of lien priority, when there's only so much money from the sale of the property in a foreclosure, which liens get paid first? In the blue on the right, top to bottom. If they are behind on their real estate property tax, that's going to get paid first. If there's any money left and there are any government special assessments for like extra street lights that were added down that 1 or 2 mile stretch of road, and all the owners who get the benefit of the lights have to pay this special assessment. And if they refuse and a lien gets put on the property, now that's going to be the second thing. Have you noticed the ones who wrote the laws put themselves in the first two spots? Funny how that works, right? Government is in the first two spots, property tax and special assessments. Keep in mind, don't get tricked. I hope they wouldn't get this nitpicky for you, but you could have a special assessment on your property that's not from the government. A government special assessment, this number 2 position here, would be, like I just said, street light or sidewalk or curb and gutter or some sort of a public improvement like that just so happens to benefit your property. But if you live in a neighborhood with a homeowners association, and I had one before, it was a townhouse, and the homeowners associations out there, guys, are not necessarily run well. One question to ask when you're helping a buyer buy in a neighborhood with an HOA is it healthy? Maybe the people running the HOA are upside down and the money is not right, and there's been abuse or it's been mishandled. In this case, this townhouse community did not ever set aside money for the inevitability of replacing the roofs. The roofs of those townhouses needed to be replaced pretty much all at the same time. And so the townhouse already, it was within a single family neighborhood, so it looked kind of like this. We had the big neighborhood with single family houses all around. And then over here, this little bubble were the townhouses. And so in order to live in this neighborhood, when you had to pay HOA dues, and I don't remember how much they were, but if you also lived in the townhouse section, you had a second HOA chunk of $250 per month. And then because this roof thing happened, they also had to pay a roof assessment or special assessment for roofs of another $250 a month. So it was all of these three things. And at the time, how many townhouses were available in the market? Well, they had some all over the place. Do you think people looking to buy a townhouse wanted to jump on the one that was immediately going to cost them an extra $250 a month? Right? So it was kind of hard for people to deal in those things, to jump on board there. So real property taxes first, special assessments by the government, not HOAs, special assessments by the government, number 2. And then anything that specifically has to do with the property itself, not something that can attach to the human, like an IRS lien or a state North Carolina Department of Revenue lien or a car-related car tax lien. Those are all general liens. They're not getting paid until all the specific liens are paid with the proceeds of this property, right? So know this race concept, this race to the courthouse. Who gets recorded first is the one who gets paid first. And the money's going to run out eventually. It might run out after the first 2 things get paid. It might run out after the first 3 things and there's nothing left for the general liens. What happens if the IRS has put a lien on your property and they don't get paid from the proceeds of the sale of the foreclosure? You still have a lien on you. It's not tied to the property anymore because you lost the ownership of the property in the foreclosure, but it's now attached to you. It always was. but the sale of the property didn't do anything to alleviate any of that IRS lien or the North Carolina revenue lien, if that's the case. So just grasp that, have that in your head. We talked about easements, another testable.
Let me ask a quick question
sure,
about special assessment liens.
Mm-hmm.
Do you get any warning, or do you just
Yes.
like get a letter in the mail one day?
Oh yeah, they would let you know that this thing is coming, and they'd say, hey, we're going to, for the public good, we need to put street lights down this road. Oh, by the way, you get one right in front of your house. We're going to need the owners to pay X dollars a month for the next X years to pay for this thing. So it's sort of like eminent domain, where they can take your property. Well, they pay you for it, but they can force you to sell a piece of your property. There was in Charlotte, on the east side of Charlotte, Sharon Amity, is it Road or Boulevard? Sharon Amity Boulevard. We would drive there when I was a kid, and these old little brick houses were way back off the road. Because we went down through there every week, and I remember one week, or one over the course of the next a 6-month period, instead of these little houses, here are the houses, it was a 2-lane road, and the government city wanted to widen the road. So they were widening the road to 4 lanes for the good of the public. That's the thing with eminent domain. They can force you to sell if it's for the public good, as long as they're not picking on any one owner. So in this case, instead of all this being the front yard, now it was going to be chopped in half basically for all these people. Now it was just this for the front yard, all the way down. And so they would have done an appraisal, come up with a fair market value, and paid each of these owners for having taken over half of their front yard for the good of the public, to have a 4-lane road instead of a 2-lane. Well, special assessment would be similar. And what if maybe in addition to the road, or instead of the road, they were going to put extra lighting, street lights, or now they got to put sidewalks because that is required to comply with the city improvement plans. The long-range plans for the city of Concord, for instance, require any business that goes in on a lot, like where I live. If I were to flip my property and come up with, if I passed the collection plate and you all gave me a couple $1 million and we put a mini storage facility here on this lot, then I would have to, as part of that project, make sure I poured or had a contractor pour sidewalk and gutter and make it tie in with all the rest of the sidewalks up and down the street. And over time, you're going to have nice, lovely sidewalks throughout the whole city, commercial business districts. But right now, there's a big chunk where me and my neighbor are just residences, and it's grass all the way to the road. But then up there where the car repair place is at the end of the road, there's a nice sidewalk, and I use it every day to walk my dogs. And down there where the school and daycare are, there's the rest of the sidewalk. So eventually, whoever buys my property and my neighbor will have to put in that. So it's required. If they came in and put something extra, they could levy the special assessment. So it'd be part of that process. Easements. I sold a property in the summertime, in the fall, and the front yard kind of looked like this. It was a high tension power line, and then a road, and then the lady's new construction house on Mountain Island Lake. So the main thing there was, hey, look out the back windows. Don't look out the front windows, because you're going to see this. Right under that power line is a Duke Power easement. So while she gets to own that land under that power line and use it, meaning she could sit in a chair there if she wants to be right under the power line, she can't build things. She can't put in a parking lot or a driveway or house or anything, but it's just land she gets to pay taxes on, but it's essentially an easement so the power company can get to their power tower thing and climb up it and manage those lines. It's not
so in that type of easement, like let's just say the homeowner owned the property before they constructed these power lines. Would the utility company pay them as like an eminent domain?
Well, since it's a utility company for profit, not the government, they would have to offer to buy it. They can't just take it over. Right. That's the key with eminent domain. It's can't be a for-profit thing. In fact, years ago in North Carolina, there was a big project, one of those Birkdale. Well, I don't know where you guys are, so you may not know the reference. In Huntersville, there's a big community called Birkdale. It's a combo of residence and commercial. So it's that kind of for-profit project, and they tried eminent domain, and it was granted, but enough people caused such a fuss about it that they shut all that down, and now it's definitely government only, for the good of the public. The argument was, well, this is good for everybody, but not everybody wants it, right? So typically, eminent domain questions are going to center around the government dictates, is it somehow benefiting the public? It's not a for-profit thing. It's a government thing. So sidewalks, street widening, that kind of deal. So in that case, for her, if she had been there first, Duke can't just push her out or take over. They would have to try to buy up property. Good question. So an easement is not about ownership. It's about the right to use it, to access things. We saw pertinent easements that run with the property, like these utility boxes or driveways. We also saw easements by necessity, like also a driveway. It's a pertinent and an easement by necessity because it's got to run with the land, meaning both of these lots are subject to this easement. The servient one is definitely super important because maybe the new owner doesn't want to allow that driveway. Well, tough. You bought this property. That's part of the deal. You have to leave it alone. You have to honor it. Maybe there's a road back here. Maybe a road goes in back here instead of the word title of the slide here. Maybe that's like a new road. And so maybe the owner decides to not have to drive across this person's lot. Let's just come off the back. It'd be kind of weird looking, but they could replace this driveway with one off the back if other things were allowed them to. And now they don't need the easement anymore. So it can go away. That wouldn't be the only method to get out to a road. If they could go to some other road around the back or something. This one, think about like squatters' rights. The acronym is OCEAN, so I use the OCEAN graphic, but these are the 5 conditions required for somebody to possibly get property from someone without paying for it. In other words, just through their use. Through what kind of use? Adverse use. There's a testable item. 20 years, if there's no cloud on the title and you use it openly, continuously, exclusively, actually, and notoriously, then you would have a potential ability to go to court and say, hey, I've been using it all these 5 ways for 20 years in a row, continuously. Please give me the property. The judge could quite likely do so. They'd have to prove all these things, right? So what could an owner do to interrupt this 20-year continuous process of someone using it in these ways? How could an owner mess up this adverse possession concept for a neighbor? Like maybe it's you and you live at the beach and you got some mountain property and you never go there, so somebody was doing all these things, using it for a farm or for growing things for 20 years in a row. What would be a way to ruin it for them so they can't do this to you?
Just go out there and cut the grass or something. Do some type of repair.
Yeah, you could. Here's one way. You could give them permission. Now it's not adverse use. Now it's not notorious. You could immediately revoke that permission too. Or you could, now you know about it, right? So it kind of ruins it for them. So the key is in knowing what's going on with your property, and then now it ruined it for them, right? If it's a 7 years continuously, if the title has a cloud on it, if the title has some sort of a mark or it's messed up, not a physical real mark, I'm just saying there's some sort of a complication with the title where it's not super perfectly clear that this is the owner, or there's any sort of issues with it, then it only takes 7 years. And by the way, I don't think I missed, where did that one go? I had a slide in here before. Government property is immune from this. In other words, you can't claim government property through adverse possession. You know, have you ever heard of the term Area 51, the government property called Area 51? It's where we keep it's where we keep the aliens from outer space and the spaceships, and it's where we hide them and nobody knows. This just tons and tons of acres of just land, just raw land with a fence around it. if you backed up to some of that and decided to knock down the fence and use 5 acres of it, it wouldn't work because it's government owned. Even if it was 20 years using it in all of these ways, you would not be able to get it through prescriptive easement, through adverse possession. And of course, an encroachment is something that comes up in this business all the time. We want to make sure that the property we're helping our clients buy or sell has no encroachments. That's why we ask, do you have a survey? And if we're helping a buyer, hey buyer, I highly advise you to get a survey. Well, let's just use the sellers. Well, we can look at the sellers, but two things about a buyer using the seller's survey. Number one, is it the same as it was when it was surveyed? How old is the survey? Did they change things around? Number two, this is the biggest one. Use this in the wild as a warning to buyers all the time, and it's testable. If a buyer does not have the property surveyed when they buy it, then their title insurance will not help them alleviate or fix an encroachment problem later in their ownership. Like say later on, they didn't have it surveyed. A couple years into the owning of it, they find out, oh, that 3-car garage, detached 3-car garage is over the property line by 5 feet. Can't just pick that up and move it, right? It's going to have to be torn down, rebuilt, or if you're lucky, maybe you could work out buying that little section of property from the neighbor, or maybe they let you use it and sign something, put it in writing, record it that you have permission. Any of those things could be pricey and complicated. And so your title insurance policy would not help you resolve that, would not cover that. It's insurance. You can file claims against insurance when it's like flood insurance, when it's house insurance, health insurance. Well, title insurance is to protect the title of the property. And so if you have a survey when you buy it, and then you find out about that detached garage crossing the line, and it needs to be moved or some money needs to be spent to correct the problem, now the title insurance policy will cover it. They will help. Who knows? I don't know about how much coverage or if it's complete coverage, but point is they're not going to cover it at all in any way if you didn't get a survey. Why? Well, because the survey is going to reveal the problem way in advance before it could even become a problem, before it could even, so it can be fixed, right? So it's not a surprise down the road. So what do we as brokers need to do? Have them sign something if they refuse our advice on paying for a survey. Right? If you say you need to get a survey, I don't want to get a survey. I had to pay $20,000 in due diligence money deposit, non-refundable. I had to get all these inspections you advised and the appraisal to buy the property. That's just one more thing, and I'm just over it. Okay, well, please sign here saying that I gave you the advice so that next year or 5 years, 10 years later, when you realize it was a terrible idea not to get one and something comes up, some sort of an encroachment, you won't come after me to fix it, right? There was one that I sold in Mooresville, historic area, and the backyard was perfectly fenced. It was just like a perfect rectangle. And so it looked kind of like this. But the problem was, so we've got the house here, kind of near the road, and the fence went back like this. Fenced yard was pretty much of a perfect rectangle. Oh, well, I guess the fence actually stopped here, right? It didn't go all the way to the street. Turns out the property line, as we discovered from the survey, did this. And so this neighbor over here had all this fence on their property. And that fence was 8 feet tall. And thank goodness they didn't care. So we drew something up, attorney drew something up legally that neighbor didn't care. They used it as a rental property. It lined up, it looked good. Didn't look like a weird shape, and they were okay with it. So that was the easy fix there, as long as my buyers were okay with it, and they were. It would have cost like $6,000 to $7,000 to move that fence. We priced it out just to, safest play would have been to move it. It would have messed up the shape of the backyard and wouldn't have been able to use as much, but that's how these things can pop up out there in the wild. So it's pretty relevant to the day to day. Let's talk about, okay, good. Got 5 more minutes for break. I don't want to mess up your breaks.
Does an encroachment have to necessarily be an improvement?
Well, let's
Like, is that going to be on the test that way, or is it like anything, not necessarily an improvement?
it could be, it's going to, yeah, it's like, do you have something specific in mind? I'm trying to think of a non-improvement that would be considered an encroachment. I mean,
No,
like a
nothing
tree,
specific. I was just sort of randomly wondering.
like a tree or something that just grew big, and over time it got big enough to grow over the line or something. That might be
That's a good example.
yeah, that's the only thing I can think of that wasn't a person that added this thing. Well, I guess they planted it 80 years ago, but over time it grew. In that case, yeah, there's an encroachment. What is the fix with a tree? Well, that's a good question. It's like, is it going to mess up the title? Good question too. I'm not sure. For your purposes for this test, I don't think you're going to have to worry about that kind of a question. It's probably going to be a man-made, person-made improvement issue with the encroachments, but we're talking driveways, fences, wells, the well water. The well could accidentally be over the line, the buildings of some sort. That's why there are setback lines to help protect against this sort of thing. So when a survey does happen, you can see what the required setback lines are from the surrounding property, as we saw on I think a graphic a while ago. Let's see. Let's go into the taxation chapter here. But first, let's take a look at the syllabus. Then we'll take a break. Then we'll do taxation. So on the syllabus, where are we? We have, let's see, we got into all the basic concepts. We did that last week. Made our way down to fixtures. That was I think our first big level 3 kind of topic. And I think you can appreciate why it's that way now because of all the definitions and conversation and how it can really throw things into disarray. We, let's see, talked about easements. We were getting into legal description, and we'll pick that back up, but I want to go to taxation first because it's early in the night, and I think math is better earlier than later. So we're going to come back to this stuff because taxation, I think, is right after this. Yeah, there it is. So we're going to go to this part now when we come back from break, and then we'll work our way through that, and we'll go into legal description. We talked about meets and bounds and government rectangular survey a little bit last Wednesday, but I'll see you back here in 10 minutes, and we will work on property taxation. welcome back. Let's get ready to talk about taxation. So, just like when you have a car, the privilege of having the car, you've got to pay the taxes on the car. Owning property, similar, right? You own real estate, you have to pay taxes on it. So if you have this property free and clear after paying the mortgage for 30 years, or somebody gave it to you, you never don't pay money. You're always paying some money for the privilege of ownership, right? And that's in the form of taxes, at least. Maybe HOA dues too. By the way, what if you don't pay your taxes for a certain amount of time? What could happen to the property?
Can you get repoed?
You got it.
Foreclosed on?
Yeah, exactly. That's what we kind of talked about with that whole lien thing. The taxation, this is what we're talking about. This level of taxing, the real property tax, the real estate property tax, is exactly what we're talking about in this chapter. And this is the thing that is in the first position of lien priority, right? So how do we calculate the taxes you have to pay on your property? What would be a fair way to figure that out? What do you think? If you were the government and we were brand new, we were starting a whole new country, how do you think it would be fair or wise to figure out the tax that someone has to pay on their property?
Setting a rate and multiplying it by the market value.
Wow, imagine that. You're doing it the same way it's really done. You know, now the property owners who own the most property are paying the most taxes, right? Theoretically. So that's the concept here. Let me make sure I've got Okay, good. Yeah, so it's the government who is imposing this tax. The tax goes for schools and streets and all the sorts of things that taxes go for the public good. And it's just one of the many governmental powers. And this is the kind of governmental power to collect this tax that funds its functions, that funds the things the government does for us, right? A couple things you need to know for this test. You might see taxes referred to as ad valorem taxes. That just means property tax, because you're taxed at the value. Ad valorem, Latin for at value. At the value, the market value of the property. Now, that does not mean that because prices went up this year from last year that now your tax value has gone up this year as well. That's not necessarily the case. In fact, taxes don't the property tax value does not go up from one year to the next. It goes up and is reassessed not necessarily goes up, but it's reassessed every 8 years. We're going to see in a future slide, next slide, it's called octennial reappraisal. Octennial, octagon, 8 sides. So 8 years. Every 8 years, the government says, let's take a look at all the tax values, and odds are the values are higher than they were when you owned it 8 years ago, and therefore we want more of your money. We're going to calculate the formula. I think it was Jack that said that, based on a newer, higher tax value, if that's what they think it needs to be reassessed for. So vocabulary here, ad valorem is the same as property tax. It's at the value of the property, the market value. But the assessed value is another term I'm going to talk about, and I'll use interchangeably. So I might say, in order to calculate the annual taxes, you need to use the assessed value. If you hear me say assessed value, it's the same as if I said tax value. Assessed means assessed by the government to determine how much your taxes are going to be. There is legislation. We've already seen the Condo Act, anything that has act in it. When we get into the rentals, there's a Residential Rental Agreements Act, there's a Tenant Security Deposit Act, all these sorts of laws that put into place how we handle things. And the one for taxation is called the Machinery Act. So think about the process of wheels, like on a cog, like one wheel touches the other and causes it to go. It's a different size, so it goes at a different speed. So they're all interlocked. The machinery, like if you opened up your watch, you'd see the little watch mechanics inside, not your Apple Watch, but your grandpa's watch. And so the Machinery Act means the machinery of the system of taxation, right? And that's where it's laid down in writing how we handle real estate taxation. So what does it look like? Every 8 years, they will reassess. They just reassessed a few years ago in my county. They did a new one called a horizontal adjustment this year. Every 4 years, it's an optional choice. The government can say, look, we've had a lot of growth the last 4 years. We don't want to wait an entire 8. We're going to do it halfway between then and the next one. So a uniform adjustment, because maybe a lot of growth, more burden on the school system, more burden on the roads. The roads are getting torn up. We need money to be put into the budget to pay for things that are being caused by more people coming in, right? So horizontal adjustment happens optionally every 4th year. But the thing that could change your tax value is every 8 years, the octennial reappraisal. So when can these things happen? That's what you need to know from this slide. Octennial reappraisal every 8 years. A horizontal adjustment, maybe, based at the discretion of the government, every 4th year. And then the tax rate, the other component of how we determine your taxes and how much you have to pay. The rate, the tax rate, just like, I don't even know, what's the sales tax rate if you go buy something at Walmart? What is it now in here? Is it like 7%, 7.5%? I'll pay attention. I should look at the receipt better. So it's the rate that we use to calculate the property tax. That can be adjusted every year. It won't be. It usually isn't. But every so often, when the government decides, in fact, this year they might possibly decrease it because of that horizontal adjustment. Maybe they're going to get enough uproar from people fussing about all the values going up. Maybe they would help alleviate that by saying, well, then let's lower the rate a little bit. So it could be adjusted every year, and we'll see how that works a little more in a minute. Here's something else to think about with taxes. How much are you going to have to pay? So there is a county tax rate. So if you live in the county, that's the tax rate you're going to be paying on. And we'll see how that math works in a little bit. But what if you live in the city also? In the city limits within the county? If you're out in a house off in the sort of suburbs or out in the sticks maybe even of the county, that's one thing. And so if you're living in this white blotch here, you're only having to pay the county taxes. In fact, your tax bill will be calculated only using the county tax rate. If you also live in the green blob, in the city limits, then there's a city tax rate also that we will add to the county rate. So city rate plus county rate is what you have to pay if you live in the city limits, the green shape here. Is there ever a case that you could live in the city and not actually physically be in the county at the same time? Physics, like think existentialism, right? Can you be where you are and not be where you are, right? That's how silly I'm getting here. So no, if you're in the city, you are also in the county. The county encompasses the city is what I'm getting at. So if you're in the city, you're going to have to pay the city tax rate combined with the county rate. But if you're in just the county, not in the city limits, then the only thing you have to calculate is the county portion. You don't have to pay the city tax rate because you're not in the city. So there's a case where you could only have to pay one of them, and it's only if you're outside the city limits, right? If you're inside the city limits, you're not just paying the city rate, you're going to be paying both. So it's going to make more sense when we actually start crunching numbers. So a timetable that we see how all these things work. In July is when that potentially different tax rate will be set. You can go many years with the same tax rate. But if they are going to set a new one, you're going to find out what the rate for this year is in July. When do you have to pay the taxes? Property tax bills are mailed out in August. Okay? That's because they want you to have the bill so you're ready to pay it if you want to pay it on the first day that it's possible to pay it. And that date is September 1st. It's an important date. You can pay your taxes as early as September 1st. In other words, if you want to pay 2024 property tax on your property, you can't pay it today. You have to wait until September 1st, right? And so we're going to use September 1st as one of the ways we count up the days, because if we're selling a property, helping somebody buy or sell property, those parties, the buyer and the seller, need to know which part of the year they are responsible for. The seller doesn't just out of the goodness of their heart pay the whole year's taxes and let the buyer just appreciate and enjoy that. It's calculated to the day of closing. Who's responsible for the taxes for the year? And so there's three that we'll see in a little while, 3 ways that we might need to calculate the taxes between the two parties. It's going to depend on when in the year the closing happens. So if we're closing on a house today in April, then we still have, May, June, July, August. We have 4 more months until September 1st. And so from January 1st all the way to August 31st, we're going to handle the calculation of the tax bill at the closing table a certain way. I'll give you the spoiler. We're going to take money from the seller's proceeds and give it to the buyer side. We're going to debit the seller, take money from them, and credit the buyer, give money to the buyer. So we'll see how we do that in a little bit. The trick for the test is the calculation of the days. You can mess up the number of days when you're counting the days from January 1st to, once you get out beyond a month or two, it can be tricky. They used to, in this pre-licensing class, say, we're going to give you a break. The Real Estate Commission they would say, let's just pretend that all months have 30 days. Forget about this 30 days has September, April, June, and blah, blah, blah. And then there's some with 31 and one with 20. That didn't used to matter for this class, but this year they changed it. They said you might be tested on real actual months you're going to need to know the months. So start working on that. There's a couple ways to remember it, like with your knuckles. And then there's just the little nursery rhyme thing. But what months have 30 days compared to 31 days compared to February, the leap year month? So we'll work on that as well. But the other dates here, if you don't pay your taxes by December 31st, then a tax lien gets filed against the property for anything you've not paid. And that happens on January 1st. So in other words, 2024 is what we're in right now. September 1st rolls around. That's the earliest I can pay my real estate taxes. But I'm not going to. I'm going to wait a little while. I can use that money more than they can. So let me give it another couple of months. In fact, if you own a house yourself, you might pay your mortgage that includes taxes and insurance. Does that sound familiar? Anybody making a mortgage payment and the payment includes not just the loan, but also a little bit toward taxes and insurance every month? That's a real world thing that a lot of people do. Well, in that case, the lender, your mortgage company, is paying your taxes for you. They don't even pay them until like November or December. So there's no penalty. You can pay them anytime from September 1st all the way to December 31st. But on January 1st, if they're still not paid, tax lien filed for any unpaid taxes. You can January 5th is the deadline to pay those past due taxes. If they're not paid by then as of January 31st, public shaming. They're going to tell the world in the newspaper of who has not yet paid their property taxes. It's posted in the local paper. So the taxable property is listed, not into foreclosure. They're just saying, hey, this tax is owed on this property. So here's what it looks like those little shapes were used to be arrows, but it changed. It took away my arrows. But that's what the same thing I just said looks like in a timeline from January 1st. The tax lien filed on unpaid taxes from the previous year. January 5th, the deadline to pay those past due taxes from the previous year. January 31st, the taxable property is listed because you didn't pay the taxes again from the previous year. That's why I have them in red. The green ones are for the current year, meaning in July, the new tax rate for the current year is set. It might be the same as it's always been. They might change it. In August is when the bills get mailed out, and in September 1st is when you can pay those taxes for the very first time for the current year, if you want to. If you don't pay, could end up with a foreclosure. That tax lien attaches to the property. Usually the foreclosure thing isn't going to happen unless you're like 2 years behind in a row. But that just depends on the entity, the jurisdiction. And just a reminder of how the property taxes are in the very, very first position. If a person's behind and has a bunch of liens on the property, and then they get foreclosed, that property tax gets settled up first. So that's how it works. Now, let's talk about the math and the rate. The rate is expressed in a couple of different possible ways in North Carolina. But first, let me introduce you something I referenced the very first night. But this is one of the ways that I like to teach the math. And it helps, I think, people that are concerned about math. Maybe algebra was not your friend back when you took it in school. So the linear normal algebra method over here, we know 2 times 3 is 6. You know that in your sleep. If we had to move those numbers around, you know that 6 divided by 3 is 2 and 6 divided by 2 is 3. If we apply that to the T formula or circle formula, this is where the numbers would go. The 6 would be on top, because whatever the thing on top is, the relationship is the 2 things on the bottom multiply together to equal it, right? So 2 bottom things, 2 times 3 equals the thing on top. In other words, most of the math in this course is a three factor equation. There's 3 things. In the tax math, we're going to see in a minute that the annual tax bill goes on the top of the T formula. And how do we get that? We get it by multiplying the tax rate by the tax value or the assessed value on the bottom. Those are the 2 things on the bottom, and the annual tax bill for that year is on the top. So depending on the test question, whichever 2 of the 3 things they give you, if you know the T formula and where you put things, you'll know what the math thing is you need to do. If you have the annual tax bill on top of $6 and the tax rate of 3, none of that makes sense, but I'm just using these numbers, you'll know, oh, the thing on top divided by the thing on the bottom equals the other thing on the bottom. So with that said, we're going to use these T formulas, circle formulas for a lot of the math. I'll always relate it back. If you don't like that, if you're just like, well, this is so much simpler and it clicks my brain easier, great. Just take that and run with it. Do what works best for you. I'm going to talk about multiple ways to deal with things because not everybody learns the same way. So what are the 2 kinds of tax rates you might see on the test and out there in the wild? In my local market, we use the one on the right. The tax rate is given as a dollar amount per $100 of the tax value. However much the tax value is, you're going to pay an amount per $100 of it. It's basically decimals. We're working with moving decimals back and forth. So I'll show you how that works. So it's the dollar per $100 method. If your property assessed value was the assessed value was literally $100 and the tax rate was $1 per 100, then your taxes would be $1 for the fact that your assessed value is $100. So we're just going to divide to convert it into a decimal. So we'll see that in a minute. Another kind of the way the tax rate could be handled, and it's not going to be this. It's not going to be both for any one area. An area, a city, town, something like that, a county, they're going to pick. I think I heard that maybe in the middle part of North Carolina, between Charlotte and the beach, that section, somewhere in there, there's some counties that use this one in red, the mill rate. And the mill rate just means we're dividing by a different number. We're going to divide by 1,000 instead of by 100. I'll come back to this slide when we have a reference point, but let's take a look here. If the tax value in this jurisdiction, in this city, the tax rate is given as $1.40 per $100 of tax value, then you're going to pay $1.40 for every $100 that are in your property's assessed value. So in other words, we're going to need to convert this $1.40 into a decimal. So we'll know what number to multiply by the assessed value. And so to do that, we could put it in the calculator. 1.4 divided by 100. And it's going to move this decimal over 2 spaces to the left, because that's how decimals work. If we divide something by 100 and it's a decimal number, you just move that decimal over 1, 2 to the left. So we need to know what number to put into the calculator. If we were to use the number 1.4 instead of 0.014, we would get an enormous number. That is, let me show you. That wouldn't even make sense. So let's say that we'll go with this same number, $1.40 per $100 of tax value. And let's say the assessed value or the tax value could use either word on the property is, for nice easy math, let's just say the tax value is $200,000 at a tax rate of $1.40 per 100. So here's our formula. We want to know what are the annual taxes that you have to pay if you own this property. And so we're going to have the assessed value down here and the tax rate over here. So do we have 2 of the 3 things that we need? Yeah, we've got our rate and we've got our assessed value. We have both of the things on the bottom in order to calculate this annual tax bill in dollars on the top. So we're going to use our $200,000 assessed value, plug that in, and now the rate is $1.40, but that's not the only part of the rate. The rate is $1.40 per $100. The rate is this whole sentence. How do we calculate something per 100? Oh, I don't know. If only there was a symbol that would represent per 100, or another word for 100, percent. There's 100 pennies in a dollar, right? Percent. How many cents are in a dollar? So in other words, when you use the percent sign in your calculator, you are automatically dividing whatever that number you put in with the percent sign, in this case 1.4, and the percent sign. Can you see that calculator? Okay, good. And you've done it. You've converted this $1.40 per 100 into a decimal. What if we didn't do that step? Then we would multiply 200,000 times the $1.40, and we forgot to divide by 100. So we've got 200,000 times $1.40. Do you think our annual tax bill up here is going to be $280,000 a year? Thank goodness no, right? So if you do the math sometime in the test and you're like, oh my gosh, that's a ridiculous number, don't worry. You just forgot to divide by 100. Now just do it now and you're still okay. What it actually should have been is $2,800 for the year, right? So again, as long as you do this divide by 100 at some point, ideally you'll do it first. You'll say $1.40 per 100. Let's divide that by 100, and now we got our decimal, and the decimal is the thing I want to multiply by the tax value. But it's not the end of the world if you forget that step. Just do it one more. Just do it, and then you'll know, oh, annual taxes. Some of this math you can kind of self-check because the logic gives away that you missed a step or you did something wrong. So let's look at some pretty slides that aren't serial killer looking writing and see if we can make some sense of it. If we have an assessed value of 257, let me make that a little bigger. 257 $1,000. Here we go. There we go. Assessed value for the property is 257,000. We're in a city or a county or a town that uses the mill rate instead of the dollars per hundred version. And the tax rate is given as 14 mills. Hang in there. It's not scary as it looks. What's going to be the annual tax bill in this situation? What do we have to work with? We have an assessed value and we have a rate of some sort. We write out our little circle formula, plug in what we know. But first, we need to convert mills into a decimal, just like we converted the dollars per hundred thing into a decimal. The way we convert mills into a decimal is divide it by 1,000 instead of 100. So when it's a mill rate that they give you, you're going to think mills, $1 million is like 2 sets of 1,000, right? If you looked at the number 1 million, it's a lot of 3 zeros, a lot of triple zeros. It's like 1, 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3. That's $1 million. So mill rate, there's a couple of sets of 3 zeros, and so if it's a mill rate that they give us, mill rate means divide it by 1,000, not 100. The dollars per hundred version that we saw here literally tells you in the name what you divide it by. You divide it by 100. But the mill rate is 1,000. In other words, another little side note, remember I told you you could just use the percent sign to accomplish the dividing it by 1,000. Don't try to use the percent sign in a mill rate problem. You would have divided it by 100. There is no divide by 1,000 button on your calculator. The divide by 100 button is the percent sign. So the mill rate, you're just going to have to do the old-fashioned way and divide with the number of 1,000 you plug in, 1,000. So let's convert our mills to a decimal. 14 divided by 1,000 means, oh, wait. Do you mean that 14 mills is the same rate as $1.40 per hundred? Yeah, because they both turn into a decimal of 0.014. You see how that worked? We had a mill rate of 14 mills. We needed to convert it to a decimal, so we divided it by 1,000, and that's the decimal we got. Back when we did the thing I just showed you on my terribly handwritten iPad, it was $1.40 per hundred. And that divided by 100 was the same decimal. Just a little casual observation there. Now that we know the decimal, we plug it in. We know our assessed value of 257. Multiply it by that decimal number of 0.014. And so our annual tax bill is going to be $35.98. That makes sense? Welcome to your first real estate math. So $35.98. What if instead of a mill rate, they use the dollar per hundred rate? We're going to keep the same assessed value, but this time it's another town in some other part of the state. And the tax rate they give and use to calculate with is $1.27 per $100. $1.27 per hundred. Okay. We're going to be, at some point, first step, dividing that $1.27 by 100. We need to convert it into a decimal. Some of you who know decimals could say, well, I don't even need to use a calculator for that. Let me just move this little dot over 2 spaces. It's going to be 0.0127. Others of you might have said, slow down. What did you just say? And I'll say, never mind. Just use a calculator. Keep it simple. You don't have to learn the mental tricks and wizardry. That's not all that too fancy, but do whatever works for you. There's a million ways to do everything. Pick one that makes sense to your brain and do that way every time. So $1.27 divided by 100 is 0.0127. Step one. Step two, plug it in. 0.0127 times the tax value of $257,000. Tax bill every year of $32.63.90. Questions? Oh, I see you, Alfred. Good job. You got that 20 minutes ago. Well done. So with the tax value, annual tax questions, step one, what's the kind of rate that it is? Step two, figure out the decimal depending on which kind of rate they're using. Step three, plug it in. Multiply it by the assessed value. Or what if the question didn't give you the assessed value? What if the question said the annual tax bill for this property is $32.63.90? The tax rate is $1.27 per hundred. What is the assessed value? You just need to know this formula and where you need to plug those numbers into the formula. And you take the annual tax divided by the rate, and it's going to show you, $257. They could ask you any of these directions, right? Any of these two things. What's the third thing? What if it says this? Here's another thing they like to throw at you. You're going to have to first figure out what the tax value of the property is. Because the word market value for this class, for this test, and out there in the wild, really means the sale price, the most current value of the property. So when you see the term market value, think it's what the buyer's paying for it or what they should pay for it. Assessed value is not the same thing as market value. Assessed value is what are they going to calculate taxes on? In a pretty healthy market, a lot of times, especially over the years, that first year of the octennial reappraisal is different. They've reassessed everybody and brought up the values. But around year 4, 5, 6, 7, a lot of times if it's $1 million property, the tax value is probably $800,000, maybe $850,000, maybe $9, something less than the $1 million that it's probably going to sell for. And that's good. As a property owner, you want to pay taxes on as little as you possibly can. So you're okay if the government thinks you're worth $900, but you're really worth $1 million, because they're going to use the $900 in determining what your annual taxes are, right? So you usually will see an assessed value or a tax value that is lower than what it actually sells for. So that's the difference that we're adding to this problem. The test question could say the assessed value is 85% of the market value. And the market value, also known as the sales price, the market value is what it sold for, $574,000. What is the assessed tax value in dollars? Okay. We need to find out what is 85% of 574 before we can calculate and use the rate and determine the annual taxes and all that. We need to first figure out what's the assessed value. And so it's simply this, 85% of that market value. So 574 times 85% sign. And so the assessed value is 487.9. If you forget that step, you're going to get the wrong answer. Here's another trick. On these multiple choice questions, they're going to give you multiple choice answers. The wrong answers are things that you'll get with common mistakes. So I bet there would be an answer based on the person accidentally using the 574 instead of the 487.9, calculating the annual taxes. Does that make sense? So step one, assess tax value. Step two, we figure out what is the actual tax value. Step two is converting the rate they give you to a decimal. Step three, put them together to get the annual taxes. So these questions could look like this, these three steps. And so here's one. The assessed value is 85% of the market value. Market value is 574. The tax rate is 9 mils. What is the annual tax bill? Step one, let's figure out the assessed value. What is 85% of 574? We did it already. It's 487.9. And so step two, convert that mill rate into a decimal. 9 mills divided by 1,000 is 0.009. We're going to take that in yellow times the tax value that we just figured out to determine our annual tax bill. That's about as complicated as they could get on these questions for tax value. Are we okay there so far? Let me know. What about this one? The assessed value is 75% of the market value. Okay, different area is going to have a different tax value versus market value number. So it's 75% of the market value. They paid $497. So 75% of $497 means we're paying taxes on this property based on a tax value of $372,750. Now we know, oh, they're giving us the rate. Oh, here's another little nuance they could do to you. They're giving you two different rates. Here's the other way this could get complicated. They're giving you the county rate and the city rate. If you only live in the county, the rate you pay is 67 cents per $100. If you also live in the city, the rate you pay is 17 cents per $100. If you live in the city limits, inside the city limits, you're going to have to add both of these things together. But let's see what the question says. The house is located outside the city limits. Which of these rates are we going to use? The county only, the city only, or the city plus the county?
County only.
County.
County only. You got it. Because it's outside the city limits. That's how they could do that to you. Okay, so good. County only is 67 cents per 100. We know how to get the tax value. We did that already. Now we're going to use the 67 cents divided by 100. So we'll know the decimal we need to use, the 0.0067. Plug that in the calculator, multiply it by the 372,750. Your tax bill will be $24.97. So in this problem, they could give you all the other three potential answer choices. One of them could be the annual taxes using $497, which would be the wrong answer. The other could be the annual taxes using both the numbers in the rate. And the third one could be just using the city by itself. By the way, will you ever only use the city rate by itself? Never. You'll never only use the city because you can't live in the city without also being physically located in the county too. That's how you remember it. And there's that. That's what we're talking about here. If you live on the green dot, all you need to pay is the 67 cent rate. If you live in the red dot, you're paying 67 plus 17 as a rate. And so back to that slide from the beginning, if it's a mill rate they give you, like 8 mills, 9 mills, 12 mills, when you need to convert to a decimal, divide by 1,000. But if they give it as dollars per 100, divide by 100. Or use the percent sign, right? But don't make the mistake of thinking, oh, mill rate, let me use the percent sign. That's not going to work. So here's the formulas that you might run into in this class. Here are the different things that we might do with taxes that you'll see on problems. We already know they give you a percent of the market value to come up with the tax value. We're prepared for that. Here's the linear algebra equation. Look for that. And then we take that assessed value, multiply it by the tax rate. It gives us the annual taxes. They might, though, need you to take it further. And they might, for some reason, want to know the monthly taxes. How much are the taxes if you were to pay 1 month of them? Just divide that annual number by 12. It's that simple, right? And for prorating taxes that we're going to learn in just a little bit, no, we're not. That's going to be a little bit. Sorry. We'll do that later when we get to closing math. We don't need to add complexity. When we need to determine what part of the year the seller is responsible for, how many days from January 1st all the way to the day of closing, the seller has to pay the taxes compared to the buyer being responsible from the day after closing through the end of the year. we're going to need to know the daily amount of taxes. We're going to convert those dollars per year, divide by either 360 or 365, depending on what the test question tells you to do, to get the daily taxes. Why 360? Well, that was back when they used to be nice to you. And every month has 30 days. Therefore, 12 months at 30 days each is 360 for the whole year. But again, they'll tell you which way they want you to do the math with. They might say, using a 365-day calendar, calculate the taxes, blah, blah, blah. And you'll, instead of dividing by 360, you'll have to divide by 365 to get the daily rate. Or, sorry, the daily dollars of taxes. Wow, that was a complete accident, and I don't think I can do it again. I hit a key on the keyboard. Okay, market value, $675,000. The assessed value is 85% of the market value. The tax rate, oops, let me hide it. I'm going to ruin it for you. We'll do a couple of exercises, but what is this? Oh, good. Okay. There we go. So, oops. I'm going to give you guys some time to work on this. In fact, yeah, I'll give you guys some time to work on this on your own. So take a moment. Tell me what the annual taxes in dollars would be for this. How we doing? The big reveal. Let's see here. Take our 675 market value, convert it to an assessed value just by multiplying it by 0.885. There we go. So we're going to use 573,750. We're going to multiply that by the mill rate, which requires converting that mill rate to a decimal. 12 divided by 1,000 is 0.012 times that value. Here, this is just the straight line algebra equation method, and 68.85. Now, do the same thing for one more question, one more problem, then we'll probably be about time for the break. Check this one out. Do this one. Okay. This time we have to be aware of the rate, where the property is located, right? So it's in the city limits this time. So what's the trick to that? Which rate are we going to use? When it's inside the city limits, we need them both.
Both.
Yeah. 0.98 plus 0.23 and use that $1.21 total as the rate. So assessed value is 70% of the market value. Market value is 734.5. That means an assessed value of 514,150. That's going to be multiplied by that rate. $1.21 per 100 gets divided by 100. So that's our formula. 0.0121 times the assessed value. The annual taxes, $62.21.22. Any issues there? Any sort of confusion points? Is it mill rate? Is it dollars per 100? If it's dollars per 100, divide by 100. If it's mill rate, divide by 1,000. Where is it? In the city limits or outside? You'll need either the county rate only or the city plus the county. And then don't forget to make sure you're using the assessed value. If they give you that the assessed value is some percentage of the market value, then don't just use the market value. All right. Let me give you another one, then we'll take a break. For this one, the market value is $857,000. The assessed value is 90% of the market value. The rate is 13 mils. The property's inside the city limits. What is the monthly tax bill? All right. Step one. What are we going to do first?
$857,000 divided by 0.90.
Multiplied by?
Right.
Yeah. I thought that's
It's going to give you the assessed value.
Yeah. So we need to work with 771,300. That's the assessed value to work with. It's 13 mils. Does it matter that the property's inside the city limits? It's kind of irrelevant. Since it's a mill problem, there's not two rates they're giving us. So that's what we call a decoy element, right? There, a lot of times in these test problems, they will give you more than you need. You don't need to know that. So part of the testing is knowing which things you do need. So be watching out for that. We just need 13 mils. So we're going to take that 771,300, multiply it by the 13 mils, make sure we divide that by 1,000. We'll plug all that in the calculator. Times 13 divided by 1,000. And that gives us an annual tax bill of $10,026.90. But make sure I always do it twice, just so I'm not doing something stupid. 771,300. Yep. But I ask you for monthly taxes. I slid that in there. Ask you, hey, real smooth, what's the monthly taxes? So we need to take that annual number divided by 12. And so the monthly tax bill is going to be $835,575 or 58. $835.58. Just don't forget to divide by the 12. So good. A lot of you took that next step. Later in the course, we're going to have to work with the tax value, the annual tax bill, and divide it by various things to know what we're to do some stuff with it. Dividing it by 12 for the monthly and dividing it by 360 or 365 for the daily is going to come in handy. Now a break would come in handy, so I'll see you back here in 10 minutes. Welcome back. Let's do one more, then we'll move on. This time, our market value is $450,000. The assessed value is 85% of the market value. City rate is 87 cents per hundred. County rate is 41 cents per hundred. Properties inside the city limits. What would be the daily tax amount based on a 365-day calendar? I have a feeling you did this faster. First step, no surprise, multiply these two things together to get the actual assessed value. So we need 450 times 85%. So we're working with an assessed value of 382,500. Do we need to add the tax values up? We're going to use the county only or the city plus the county?
Both.
Got them both. So if we add them up together, what is that? 128. Double check. 0.87 plus 0.41. $1.28 per hundred. So we need that $1.28. We need the 382.5. And if we were to just be wheeling and dealing and we plug those in together, 382.5, and get this huge number, 489.6, we're going to know that can't be the annual tax bill. That's ridiculous. Oh, yeah, I forgot to divide by 100. So now we just divide this by 100. We can divide the entire total of the bottom numbers by 100, and it'll accomplish the same thing. That makes more sense. The annual tax bill is $48.96. But we're not finished because it asked for the taxes per day. We need to divide this thing by how many days are in the year. 365 is what they gave us. And so the taxes per day would be $13.41. Good? Let me know if not. You can reach out if you're I feel like you're all pretty good. You all look strong in the video, but let me know if you want to do it privately. Reach out to me, text or email later in the week, anything like that. Not that this is a problem for you, but when things do become problems, I'm fine with you reaching out in other ways, one-on-one. Let's go into, let's pick back up where we were leaving off last week. This one. Oops, that's not what I want. We talked about the word alienation, which just means that we are separating or alienating ourselves from the property, meaning we're selling it or giving it away. You know, somebody gave you property. We'll talk about what kind of deed you would want to get. It's called a gift deed, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but it's usually what we're talking about is selling. And that's why this word says what it says. We'll get into another use of the word alienation when we get over to the finance chapter, because when you borrow money from a lender, they make you sign an alienation clause along with the other 500 pages that you have to sign. And that says, hey, if you sell this property, you have to pay us everything you owe us. You can't just sell the property and keep paying us $1,100 a month. The entire loan will be due. That's the alienation clause. So we'll see that used again. We talked about describing the property. If we are transferring property from one person to another, then we need to make sure it's the right property, and a street address is not good enough. Street address is an informal reference to the property. It's not enough. It needs to be more. And you'll find the various ways we can describe a property in the proper legal description is one of these three. This is where we ended the other night. I hurried through it. But the meets and bounds method is the best method. In North Carolina, it's the preferred method. As along with all the 13 original colony states too, and Texas, we all prefer the meets and bounds method, but that's not the only allowable legal description. You could describe property these other two ways too, referring to a prior recorded deed. A deed that got recorded in a sale of this property in years past. And as long as nothing has changed in the description of the property, nobody sold off a piece of it or added to it, then we can just reference that deed from 3 years ago or 20 years ago or whatever it was. Just put a reference to it in the contract that this is the property being sold. Or third way to have a legal description that's enough in North Carolina is to reference a recorded plat map. Recorded means, again, it's in the courthouse. It's in the records at the Register of Deeds office where they keep things on the public record. So that's the reference we're talking about. It'll be a deed book and a page number. So book and page number of the location of either the plat map, if that's what they're using, or the prior recorded deed. So it'll be a book and a page number reference that we're looking at. I'll show it to you on the contract. Let's see if the contract is close. Here it is. So here's our standard contract 2T that I would suggest you just be looking at in your studies. Just kind of get familiar. You don't have to memorize it. We go into great depth in it in post licensing 302. But for this class, I'm going to point out some of the highlights. We already looked on this thing to see about how fixtures work. And remember, we looked at the bullet point list of what the standard contract that we use considers a fixture, more than just the IRMA definition, right? But let's look at the first page of this contract where the property address goes. The first two things we fill in the blanks for are the parties, the seller and the buyer. Then we move on down, and now the third most important information is, what are they selling? What are they buying? And so, yes, it does have a place for the street address, because you should include anything you've got, everything you've got. So we'll certainly put that in, but then this next part is where we put the legal description. And notice it says, complete all applicable legal description methods that you have. In other words, if you have the meets and bounds description, if you also have a recorded plat map, if you also have a recorded prior deed, put them all. Put them all in there. We want to make it perfectly 100% crystal clear what the property is that we're dealing with. So if it's a plat map reference, that's this first one. And it's going to say what lot or unit on the plat map, what section or block, and what lot or unit. If it's in a subdivision or a condominium complex, they want that name too. Put that in there. If it's if it gives you some sort of a book or page number to the plat map, you'll put that in here too. The book number there, the page number there. And then the tax record is another place to get information on the property. You can look up the tax records for your neighbors, for yourself. And there is an identification number referencing the tax record. That is not a legal description. The tax record, tax identification number is not good enough, but you should put it in here also. Because again, we want to get the full picture. Any way to describe it, if you have the tax parcel ID number, the recorded plat, book and page, the recorded deed, everything. If here's another place to put the book and page, the book at the courthouse in the Register of Deeds office, where you'll find the actual physical document and what page within that book we're talking about. It could be deed book 378. Page number 19, for instance. So that is where we put property description on the standard 2T contract. As much as you have, put all of it in there. What is not an adequate legal description that we use in North Carolina is what the rest of the country uses, and therefore questions about the government rectangular survey system will be on the national portion of the exam. So yes, they could test you on it. We saw some terms, right? We learned the terms. We'll look at them again. That's about all you need to know for government rectangular survey system. The meets and bounds terms are beginning and ending points. The monuments is where the directions change, like the stake in the ground or the rock or the river or the intersection of two roads. Meets is distance, bounds is direction. That's any of these words could show up on the test. Here's how they relate to the actual survey or plat map. And then here's the other one. The government rectangular survey system is the idea. Let's take the whole country, besides those colonies, put a grid on it, north, south, east, west. It looks like this. And now within that grid is how we identify a town or a city. And so the vocabulary terms to be familiar with: meridians and ranges run up and down, north, south, purple. Baselines and tiers run east, west, horizontal, in yellow on this one. And so the blue square is just one of any of these possibilities. All of these squares are a 6 mile square township. What's the dimensions of a township? 6 miles by 6 miles. That's a township. the township is composed of 36 sections that are each 1 mile squares. So all these little squares in the township in blue are 1 mile sections. There's 36 of them. All the squares are sections within the township, I should say. And thank goodness they changed it. I told you the last time. You used to, like 10, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago. I think they did it just when I started teaching this. In order to figure out where a property is located in those other states, they will say the description would be the property is located at the southeast quarter of the northeast corner of this section number 23 in township whatever. And you'd have to work backwards to figure out which of the blocks the property is located in. If you see a question like that in the back of the chapter, ignore it. You don't need to do that for this test anymore. So that's one example of some of the stuff you might see in the chapter quiz that is irrelevant to you. If you're ever wondering, if you see something in the chapter quiz questions that is not something you saw in the syllabus, ask me, and I'll let you know if it's something that you need to spend your time on. So, yeah, and that's it. So, back to the North Carolina methods of legal description. Here's what a deed looks like. So, here's what we could be referencing. A prior recorded one of these. This is obviously a blank one, and it has the title North Carolina and the type of deed it is. We'll learn in a little while the different types of deeds. The best kind of deed is a general warranty deed. If it's a special warranty deed or a quitclaim deed or any of the other kinds, they would have the appropriate name there. But it's about a third of the way down the page, and up at the top, they reserve that top section for when it's officially notarized, and the excise tax amount. We'll see how to calculate excise tax, I think, today as well. So it just references who received it and recorded things. But then it gets into who's the seller. The seller is called the grantor. They're giving it up or selling it. They're conveying or transferring it over to the grantee. So the grantor is the seller. The grantee is the buyer or the receiver if it's free. And then they'll describe the real estate. And it says here, write the legal description here. It could just be as little as here's the deed and the book and page number of the previously recorded deed. And that's all that gets typed in here. Who's making this deed, by the way? Who's the one creating this document, filling in these blanks? Do we do it?
Attorney.
Yep. More specifically, the paralegal, because that's who does all the work. The attorney has to sign their name to it, make sure everybody's doing things properly. But yeah, the attorney's office is what does this, is who prepares this thing. That's one of the things during the under contract period of time that the attorney's office is handling. We, from on the buyer agent side, let me spell that out a little bit. So we just went under contract. We're making our way to closing day. And there's a little period of time in here somewhere, probably somewhere around here, that is the due diligence period. We'll get into all that later. But somewhere in this timeline, what's happening? Well, during this part, the due diligence period, the buyer's side of everything, the buyer agent along with the buyer, we're scheduling inspections and survey and doing anything that buyer needs to justify backing out of the contract. Because if they back out during this due diligence period, then they can get their earnest money back. They're still not going to get their due diligence money back. There's two different checks they have to write: earnest money and due diligence money. So they're not getting that back. There's almost no way they'll ever get that back. It's non-refundable. And guys, in this business the last several years, the amount of non-refundable due diligence deposit I've seen and heard about in my CE classes, hundreds of thousands of dollars sometimes. Typically, the normal lower number, maybe 5,000 or 10,000. But as crazy as the multiple offers got out there, people would use this due diligence money, which is non-refundable, paid to the seller as long as they accept the contract and sign. They get that money this day, the moment it goes under contract, and they don't have to give it back. It's made payable to the seller. They can go to Disney. Some of them paid off their mortgage with it. And then the deal fell through and they ended up having a paid for house. I've heard of $50,000 for due diligence money. I've heard of $100,000. I heard of $400,000 of non-refundable due diligence money because the buyer was so insistent on winning. Probably the buyer had tried 10 or 20 offers in a row and missed and lost, and they were tired of losing in the multiple offer situation. That has to be what happened. So we'll talk about these things over and over, earnest money and due diligence money. So that's what the buyer and buyer agent are doing, mostly during this period. Once they've had inspections, they're going to maybe ask the seller to fix some things, and the seller has all the way this whole amount of time, all the way up to closing, to fix it, to fix whatever they've agreed to fix. They don't have to, by the way. They could say no. What's the seller doing? What's the listing agent doing during this period of time? Well, they are waiting on the buyer to see what they come up with from their inspections. They're waiting to see about the buyer's loan getting approved, or we're all holding our breath, hoping that buyer is strong. And if you're a good agent, in this point, when you're not even there, but before you've agreed to a contract, you're checking any offers that come in to make sure the money sounds strong. Okay, hey, who's your lender? Let me see. What do they say about your likelihood of getting this loan approved? And if it's multiple offers, is it a loan where you're putting 10% down or 20% down or 0% down or 50% down? Which one do you think a seller might feel more confident that will actually get to the closing table with an approved loan? Probably the higher number of down payment, right? And then also, how strong do they look credit-wise, credit approval, all that sort of thing. But most of the work is done by the buyer side. And then behind the scenes, the attorney's office is doing a bunch of stuff too. Probably more like in this part, they want to kind of maybe give some time for the inspections to cause the deal to fall apart, and they haven't done too much wasted work. They'll get paid if they did. But they're probably, if I had to guess, behind the scenes, the attorney's work is probably done mostly 2/3 of the way through that process. But what are they doing? They're doing a title search to make sure any liens that might have been placed on the property, as we talked about before. They are doing an info sheet. They're sending an information sheet to both sides, the buyer agent and the listing agent. They'll say, hey, tell us about your client. Name, social security number, mailing address, how many owners, what's your commission that you're expected to get, all the things that could create a dollar amount line item on the closing disclosure is what's going to be on this information sheet. And oh, by the way, a disclaimer and a disclosure saying, hey, the attorney represents the buyer, not the seller, but they can do the little bit of work they need the seller needs done, which is basically the title search, the title preparation, the deed prep, sorry. So they will prepare that deed to bring it back around full circle to today's topic. So preparing the deed. How much does it cost to the attorney to charge to prepare the deed? It depends, but anywhere I've seen from $300 to $500. So that's what we're talking about here, and that's who's doing it. The attorney is preparing that deed, among other things, during the under contract period. And so here's where they're going to put that legal description, and then there's a couple other pages. You can see down here, page 1 of 2. It's not enormous. The deed is usually pretty streamlined. So here's what they would use to reference a previously recorded deed. This deed for this transaction would say, hey, go look at that other deed because it's the same property. Nothing has changed. Just reference that deed from that sale from 10 years ago. Or this method, referencing a previously recorded plat map. Again, if no changes happened, it's still okay to use it. So this map, very official looking, looks like a big survey of all these properties mashed together. And that's exactly what it is, right? So all these reference points, the grids here are referencing like the curves. See some radiuses that aren't like hard points, hard like rectangle sides. The table down here is calculating like what degree of the radius. It's irrelevant. You don't need to know that. Like this lot here has a bit of a curve across the front. So they reference all that stuff. But this is saying that on lot 15, I've got it in blue, within the block E on this map is the property we're selling or buying. If it's over here, then it's in block D. If it's in lot, maybe you mixed it up and you said lot 15 of block D, that would be this one, right? So that's why it's good to have multiple versions of legal descriptions, so we can make sure if there's a transposition of numbers or letters, the other legal descriptions being used will help you clear it up. The plat, once a developer finishes the subdivision, the plat has to be recorded at the courthouse, Register of Deeds, I should say, in order to be a legally accepted legal description. And it's also got to be done to be a legal closing. You can't close on a new construction sale until you have a final and a recorded plat map. That's got to be a thing that has been done. So the tax parcel ID and the street address, as we mentioned, are not an adequate description. Let me show you a tax record, just a random tax record. There's a lot of information available in a tax record, but the tax parcel ID is useful to get to the tax record, but again, it's not a legal description. So if we go over to the MLS, it gives a quick, easy link to the GIS, which is basically the tax map stuff. Let me do this one, though. We'll just use this one. I used a pretty broad name of a street. Oh, I know. I'll do this. So just randomly picking from somebody that I don't know. Here's somebody's random tax record. And this is not the official county version. There is a county version, and then there's these different, like, you know how Zillow pulls the data from the MLS and shows it in their own format? Well, this is something called Realist, and there's a couple other ones that just take tax record info and show it in their own way. So this just shows what the taxing authority knows about the property, and they think this property has 4 bedrooms, 3 full baths, 1 half bath. They don't have recent enough information to show a recent sale date and sale price, but it's 3,078 square feet of building and 8,272 square feet of lot size. We tend to go by acres, but they do have references to lot size. But if we make our way down, it tells us the subdivision. And then here's the parcel ID. It's like a 10-digit or plus digit reference number. It's not a legal description, but we need to put it in the information, put in the contract. And then here is the legal description for this property. The actual legal description is a lot based on a plat map. So lot 300 of Dominion Crossing at Highland Creek, 0.19 acre. That entire thing is the legal description referencing a plat map. If we keep on going, it shows the last tax values of the last 3 years. It shows how much of that is land value versus the improvement value. It even shows how much the taxes have cost them over the last 3 years, 39, 34. I bet if this is in Concord, that this number is going up for this year. And then if we keep on going, it's got some property data like square feet. Oh, here's that version of acres, 0.19 acres. And then, yes, here's what I wanted to show you. Down here in the sales history, it shows a reference to the deed, and you could just look it up at the Register of Deeds, and you're going to look for Deed Book 7105, page number 87. So find that in this tax record, go stick it in the contract. So what do we have on this tax record? We have the address, we have the tax parcel ID number, we have a deed book and page number. We even had a reference to a plat, the legal description. We had like 4, not all legal, but 4 ways to describe the property. 2 of them were adequate legal descriptions. This version even has a little map of the neighborhood and the lot. And there's a history of refinances over the years and this and that and the other. Looks like this kind of deed that was recorded in 2006 was actually a correction deed. There must have been some typo that had to be corrected. And it looks like this person, I should probably call on this person because they've owned this place since 2006. They might want to sell right now. I just stumbled across them looking at the tax record to show you guys. And what are the chances that somebody might be ready to sell after almost 20 years? But they bought it straight from the builder. Ryland is a builder. So this is the original owner from 2006. So that's all the kind of information you can learn from the tax record. Pretty helpful. There we go. Boom. And then here's an example of a survey that plat map, this map, if you were to zoom in, you can't just do that, obviously, but the survey version of each individual lot would look kind of like this. And so on your average typical survey, we've got all kinds of information. We've got the bold, looks like, well, they've got the dotted line as the actual property line. Oh, they have these little references, which are kind of hard to read, but they tell the setback, the distance that you have to build the property within certain lines. You can't build it and cram it all the way over to the edge. That's going to give you a huge lot or yard, usable yard, but it would look kind of silly. And most neighborhoods, most areas require, most cities and county code requires a minimum setback line from the front line versus the side lines versus the very back lines. So it's more than just the size of the lot. A survey also verifies the dimensions. It even will reference if there's a flood zone. We'll talk more about flood zones and flood insurance this week. What else? Lot and block information, and then easements and encroachments. If there are some sort of easement, they'd usually have like a dotted line showing where the power line or whatever the cause of that easement might be. Here's another testable question. Who should actually tell the consumer what the survey is talking about? We can make sure the survey gets done. We can order it and have it sent to the attorney. Once it's complete, we can meet the surveyor at the property and make sure they can access what they need to. Maybe there's a lot of fences that need to be unlocked or something. But as far as pulling this survey out with our client and saying, here's what it means, that would be called interpreting the survey. And we're not allowed to do that. Who gets to interpret the survey and explain it to the client?
Certified surveyor.
You got it. Surveyor, the attorney, but not us brokers. And it's tempting. Sometimes they start talking to you at closing and they look at the survey for the first time. This might be the first time they've seen it. And they're like, oh, great. So let's see, where can we put the fence? Because now that we have the survey, let's give it to the fencing guys. Don't look down here at however far, like, where is it? I don't know if it's got one, but somewhere on here, it'll show, it says 1 inch equals 30 feet. Don't mark off 1 inch on your business card and start trying to work your way around and figure out how much fencing they're going to have to buy. Don't do any sort of interpreting the survey, right? You just say, here's the survey. Let's get the quote from the fence person, because that's who's got to tell you how much they're going to charge you for anyway. Let's just let them figure out how much fencing we're talking about, because then you even get into things of, are we allowed to bring the front of the fence up to the front of the house? The HOA rules might say, no, it's got to be off the back corner of the house, not the front. Maybe you can come halfway up, all kinds of things. So it's a legal document. Brokers should not give advice. The deed itself, we saw a little version of a blank one. It's just evidence that you own it and what you're allowed to do with it. It shows that you have a bundle of legal rights in owning this property. And so we'll get into the types of deeds in a little bit. So, a couple funny little phrases and words to be familiar with for this test. Under common law of North Carolina, the sale or the transfer of the property is considered completed when the deed has been delivered to the new owner and has been accepted by the owner. You can't force the deed upon the owner for it to be valid, right? So under common law, the title has transferred once it has been delivered and voluntarily accepted, right? In North Carolina, it's a step further, and the acceptance part of that definition is considered having been accomplished once the deed gets recorded at the Register of Deeds. So let's say we're at the closing table. The attorney has shown the nice, pretty deed that they drew up, and the seller signs the deed, by the way. The seller is the only one who signs the deed. The buyer does not sign the deed. On your little crib notes there, wherever you're writing things that Neil says are testable, write this: seller signs the deed, not the buyer. Now, a better word to use is grantor. The grantor is the only one who signs the deed. They're signing it over. If you ever sold a car, it's the seller of the car who signs the title over, right? The buyer of the car doesn't sign it. So it's signed over to them. Same thing for this. So that's not when it's considered to have been transferred, though. We're in the attorney's office. The seller or grantor has signed the deed. It's not until the end of the closing procedures, where everybody has signed every document. If it's the buyer used a loan, they're going to have about 2 inches thick worth of documents that they had to sign and initial. The attorney paralegal scans them all in, sends them over to the lender, emails them. The lender looks through everything. This, in other words, when you go to closing with your client, you're not getting your check right away. You should probably schedule time to come back in a couple hours and get your check that you're going to take back to your office and turn in to your broker in charge. And then hopefully that they will give you your piece of that check, right? That also means the seller doesn't get their proceeds check the moment you're sitting there around the table. Usually you need to prepare your people in advance. It's not time to tell them at the closing table. They're expecting to get a check and walk out the door. Let's give them the news 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, or at the listing table, so they understand. Don't make plans and arrangements to go spend that new money you just got immediately, because it's going to take a couple hours for these other steps, these final steps to take place. So the attorney scans and sends everything up to the lender. The lender looks it over. Okay, yeah, missed a spot. Sign here, initial here. Then once they've approved all of that, they tell the attorney, looks good, everything's signed. We are going to they have not yet wired the money, the loan amount, but they probably have. If they have already and it's already received by the attorney in their account, they'll say, okay, attorney, you're cleared to release the funds. You can now give out the checks from the loan amount that we're loaning, which means paying all the various things that the closing charges, the attorney fees, the agent commissions, the proceeds to the seller, all those things are what that loan amount is going to be used to fund, right? So they're authorized to do that, but not until the deed gets recorded at the Register of Deeds. So before that money can get dispersed, the lender says, okay, attorney, everything looks good, you can go ahead to the Register of Deeds online. Used to be they'd go in person. In some places they probably still do, but most of them record these things online now. And record the deed to the public record. Now you'll have a book and a page number in the latest book of all these public documents. Once the deed has been officially recorded, the paralegal will tell both agents, hey, safe to come pick up your check now. And the seller, hey, seller, you can come pick up your check. Or if you want us to wire your funds, we'll go ahead and wire them now based on the instructions you gave us earlier. So that's the chain of events. That's kind of how it all plays out. So under common law, in general, the transfer happens when it's delivered and accepted voluntarily. But in North Carolina, that acceptance is considered the moment the deed gets recorded. So again, it's also the moment that everybody can get paid. So a pretty big, important moment. And by the way, even if you're recording it on the internet, online, logging in instead of driving or walking to it, by the way, it's also why all these attorneys' offices, especially in smaller towns, are in walking distance of the courthouse. Because if that's where the Register of Deeds office is, they would send a paralegal over there to walk it to the Register of Deeds to record this deed in person once upon a time. Now they log in. But even though they are doing it online, it's not like ordering something on Amazon or doing anything else online. It doesn't just queue up and happen immediately. You have to wait your turn. So if 20 other people have logged in to record things, the paralegal is literally waiting, and they see on the screen, okay, we're the 20th in line. Okay, now we're 19th. Now we're 16th. Now we're 13th. They have to wait and then put in the information and get it recorded. So it's not like necessarily instant. That's why you could be in a situation where you have a closing on a Friday, and the registers of deeds offices tend to stop taking business at 4 o'clock. If the closing got delayed and the deed didn't get recorded until after 4, you're not getting paid today. The seller's not getting their money today. And if the seller's not getting their money today, the buyer has every right and just may give the orders that the seller might give the orders that the keys don't get released to the buyer. If the seller's not getting their money, they may not want to hand over the keys, because until the deed gets recorded, none of that is required to happen, and the money definitely shouldn't be given out until the deed is recorded. Why? It has to do with the title search and the liens. So one more thing I left out that the attorney is going to do when they record that deed, right before they record it, they do a really quick backup title search to check and see if any new liens have been placed upon the property since they did the big one a couple days ago or a couple of weeks ago. The one that they do during the under contract phase. They do one more check. What if a mechanic's lien popped up? What if any other lien popped up against the property in the meantime? They've got to make sure that stuff didn't happen. And if it did happen, they've got to fix it. They've got to say, oh, seller, you owe money. Somebody has recorded a lien on your property that we weren't aware of. You've got to fix it. It hopefully would be as simple as the seller saying, okay, well, just use my sale proceeds to fix it. Somehow or other, it's got to be dealt with, right? That's why the recording is so important in North Carolina. Attorney's not allowed to give out money until it's recorded, because until it's recorded, it's possible that another lien could be put against the property. So it's a pretty big thing when they call you or email you, the paralegal, and says, hey, we're on record. That means great. Free to hand out the money. Let me go get my check, right? But again, as a broker, if you don't own your own firm, that's not your check you're getting. You're getting the check made out to the firm. You're going to have to go turn it into your office along with all your paperwork. Hopefully that office manager or the BIC will go ahead and cut you your check that you can now cash that same day, or who knows, whatever the arrangement is. It might take them a couple of days to turn that around. When we come back from break, we're going to talk about more of these terms and what these different kinds of deeds look like. See you back here in 10.
As someone who also plays pickup basketball from time to time, who is the most athletic comedian you've ever seen hoop?
Sandler.
Really?
Sandler could ball, dude. And he plays like dirty. Him and his boys. It's pretty great. He's like really, really good and competitive. He has like he'll back you down and like he'll really and like at first you're like this is cool. At first you're like this is really cool. I'm playing ball with Adam Sandler, and then you're like, ow.
As someone who also plays pickup
Wow. Hi, nice to meet you.
I'm Jay.
It's the bridesmaid, Adam. Wow. Hi, nice to meet you.
I'm Jay.
It's the bridesmaid, Adam.
break of the night, guys. Okay, some more vocabulary words for you. Alienation, we know that one. Transferring the property. Voluntary. That means gift or sale. You're doing it on purpose. You're transferring the deed voluntarily. Remember we had voluntary and involuntary liens? Happy versus sad. Voluntary and involuntary transfers of the deed. Voluntary means you want to sell it. You want to give it away. Involuntary means somebody's taking it away from you as a consequence of you not doing something you're supposed to do, right? So kind of a similar meaning there. Voluntary transfer and involuntary transfer. The executor carries out the provisions of the deed. Probate is the word we use when someone has passed away and their estate has to be dealt with by the executor. The executor is the one that handles the estate of a person who died. And probate is the legal process that must be followed. You can't just die and people come to your house and take what they can grab and walk away, right? That's not the proper way to do this thing. For one thing, you might die with a lot of debts that you owe people. And so one of the processes, one of the components of probate, the process of probate involves telling the world through a newspaper classified ad that so-and-so died. Hey, any of you owe money? Or did they owe you money? Come forward. Here's your chance. I think it's like 60, 90 days, something like that, for any debt person that they owe a debt to come forward and claim that debt. They'd have to prove it, obviously. So probate involves that, and it involves coming up with a value of all the different assets of the estate, and then having, I guess, if there's a will, they would handle that as well as part of it. But paying for these things, having all that sort of processed, all that sort of thing processed. The people who end up with the assets from the estate are the beneficiaries. The one and if somebody dies without a will, then the word for that is dying intestate. intestate. So you could see a problem, a test question that has those words on it. So we'll see that. Oh, there it is. It's the next slide. When the owner dies, did they die with a will? Then they died testate, T-E-S-T-A-T-E. If they died with no will, it was intestate. So if the test question says so-and-so died intestate, what's going to happen to their property? You'd have that's how this sort of thing would work. So with a will means voluntary alienation. Before they died, they told and they dictated how they wanted their property to be handled. To whom will it go, right? That's the best way to make sure your wishes are fulfilled, for somebody to have a will. If you don't have one, guess what? Any day could be the last day. Get a will, no matter how young you are, especially once you have some assets. Intestate means you died with no will. Now your property will be handled according to certain guidelines. In North Carolina, here it is, testable item, sorry. In North Carolina, if there is no will, so if you die intestate, no will, and you have no heirs, guess who gets your property? Your real estate goes to the state of North Carolina through another vocabulary word called escheat, E-S-C-H-E-A-T. I don't know. I kind of look at the word cheat within the word escheat. It kind of feels like North Carolina is cheating by getting just to take our property if we die with no will and no heirs. So just fair warning, once you have real estate, write a will, figure out somebody you want it to go to, because if not, you better be happy with the state of North Carolina getting it. And they'll sell it and they'll spend it on whatever the government likes to spend money on. So you need to know that stuff. That'll, especially the last thing in North Carolina, no will, no heirs. The state will take over through the process called escheat. So we've covered several government actions that could involve taking your property. Eminent domain, they got to pay you fair market value, but they pretty much are going to do it whether you want them to or not. There is an appeal process, but good luck with that. It's probably not going to work so well because it's for the public good, right? Escheat is another one. Voluntary alienation, you're choosing to sell it, you're choosing to gift it. So it's happy. Involuntary, usually court ordered, foreclosure, liens, somehow or other, you are being separated from your property. This is one of those methods, the real estate phenomenon called foreclosure. If you don't keep paying your mortgage, you don't get to stay. If you don't pay, you can't stay. And the lien holder takes the property to pay off the debts that they are owed. We know about this method too. We already looked at that one, but it's another involuntary way to transfer your property. You're losing it because somebody basically used it continuously, openly, exclusively, adversely, notoriously for 20 continuous years or 7 years with a clouded title. If they can prove they used it in all of these ways, the owner could lose it and they could get it. This other party, right? So adverse possession, the OCEAN acronym, adverse possession is another method of involuntary deed transfer. And this is about the title. If it's a nice, clear title, you have to do all those OCEAN acronym items 20 years continuously. If it's a clouded title, 7 years is enough. Oh, here it is. I just wasn't expecting it to be further in the slide deck, but here's where adverse possession will not work. Government property is exempt from getting it through adverse possession. And we already talked about this. Owner dies with no will and no heirs. The government gets the property through escheat. Here's eminent domain again. So let's say maybe that was a 2-lane road once upon a time. Now it's 4 lanes. And so look at this structure over here on the left. I have a feeling they might have had a little more space between themselves and the road at some point, but eminent domain may very well have taken half for most of their front yard to put in this bigger road. It's got to be, if you're doing eminent domain, it's through the process, it's called of condemnation. It's not like they're condemning a property that's unsafe to live in. That's usually what I think of when I see the word condemnation, but condemning the property through eminent domain means the government is forcing you to sell it. They're going to give you fair market value, fair compensation, I should say. You may not agree with what they say fair compensation is, but it's not just because they want to for any one person's benefit or for a profit of a corporation. It's for the good of the public, not just the good of one person. The owner still has access to a process of appeal, a due process, but again, who's going to win that? Okay. Now, let's swallow really hard, take a sip, calm your brain, and let's get ready for this concept of a valid deed. What makes it a good deed? Do you think it would be a good deed if somebody wrote it on a gum wrapper and nobody signed anything? You can have my property. And the seller didn't even sign it. It's on a gum wrapper written with smudged ink from the bar. Yeah, that's probably not going to be considered a valid deed in a court of law. There are some essential elements required that have to be in place for the deed to be considered valid. What does valid mean? We're going to get into some V words. The other V words are void and voidable. Valid, void, and voidable. And when it comes to those V words, is it a voided deed? Is it a voidable deed? Or is it a valid deed? It's not about whether the deed has expired or is bad, like your milk expired, void, or better is a better example. Anybody buy a lottery ticket in the last couple of years? If you scratch off, if the ticket says you have to scratch off 3 things, but you accidentally scratch off 4 things, what do you have? You have a voided lottery ticket. It's not going to win you anything, even if you scratched off everything that you were supposed to and revealed like 3 things in a row. But if you scratched off too many, didn't follow the rules, it's void. This is not the same thing. When it comes to a deed, it's about sorry, one second. is it a deed that has no consequences, right? A deed that's has everything in place that's proper. So one of the essential items is that the deed must be in writing to be considered a valid deed. That makes sense. You don't want to just say, hey, he told me he was going to sell it to me and that it could be my property. I gave him a $5 bill and he said it was now mine verbally. You have no proof, right? It's not enforceable in a court of law unless it's in writing. So, of course, being in writing would be an essential element. That makes sense. The one who's signing it over, the seller, the grantor, must have legal capacity. What does that mean? Legal capacity. Anybody know or saw in your reading already? What does it mean when someone has legal capacity to sign a contract, for instance, or in this case, a deed?
To be of competent mind.
Yeah, competency is one of them. There's two more. To be competent or legally sane, maybe another way to say it. Two more. You're on the right track. Legal capacity. Let's think about it from a point of a contract. Do you think... So I'm a bit of a YouTube junkie. When I want to waste some time, I'll go down this bizarre rabbit hole of whatever topic I'm on to in that moment. And once upon a time, I ran across this 16-year-old kid who jumps on trampolines and jumps off the roof of his mom's house onto the trampoline. And he had about 10,000 viewers, subscribers at the time. And a year later, I tuned in and I had watched him a little along the way. He had 1 million subscribers. He grew that channel doing crazy stunts. He ended up buying his mom a $500,000 house, and he bought himself a $150,000 sports car, but he was 17 years old. If he came to my house and said, Neil, I want to buy your house. You have 5 acres and I could put a bunch of trampolines on it. Could I sell him my house if he's underage? I can, except the only consequence is he could back out of the sale and there's nothing I could do about it. At any point along the way, it is not enforceable to me against him because he is not of legal capacity. He can do it and go through it successfully, but the whole time I would be at his mercy. At any point he could say, no, I don't want to do this anymore. And it wouldn't be considered what they call breaching the contract. So in this case, in order for it to be considered a valid deed, the seller, the grantor, must be 18 or older, sane, and sober. 18, sane, and sober. Were they sober or were they under the influence of drugs or alcohol or medication when they signed the deed over? Well, then it's not a valid deed. In order for it to be considered a valid deed, they have to be 18, sane, and sober when they sign it over to someone. So he could have bought it from me and then decided to sell it the next year, and then he would have been the seller. And maybe at that point he had turned 18, but maybe he signed it when he was smoking some certain substances, right? So yeah, legal capacity, 18, sane, and sober. What else has to be in place for this deed to be considered valid? The grantor and the grantee, the buyer and the seller, or the giver and the taker of the deed have to be identified. That doesn't mean they both sign it. That just means their name is on it, typed on it, right? So both are identified. Yeah, who's giving it and who's taking it. The property must be adequately identified. Using what? How do we adequately identify a property? How are we going to reference the property being conveyed or transferred? Using... Yeah, plat map is one of them, and it's one version of 3 possible legal
descriptions.
Yeah. Legal description. Property must be adequately identified. You adequately identify property using one of the 3 kinds of legal descriptions. Exactly right. Adequate words of conveyance. What in the world does that mean? Remember the deed, the blank deed we looked at? It's got some space to write stuff. In that space on that deed, the attorney's going to write what's happening, right? This grantor is selling this property to this grantee, essentially, and it's going to be, in the form of a general warranty deed or whatever other kind of deed it might be. So making sure all of those words are in place. So we know, how it's being conveyed or given from the seller to the buyer. Signed by the grantor, only the grantor, the grantee does not sign it, and then delivered and voluntarily accepted. And we learned a little bit ago that that means it needs to get recorded for it to be a valid deed. Valid deed. Let me back up. I just misspoke. This is the confusing part of this kind of concept, because we saw that common law says deeds must be delivered and then also voluntarily accepted. So in order for the deed to be considered valid, it needs to be delivered and voluntarily accepted. These are the what is that? 2, 4, 7 essential elements that are required to be in place for the deed to be considered valid. There are some other things that should be on the deed and done with the deed, but they are non-essential. Non-essential elements of a deed. In other words, these are all good ideas, but if it's missing any of these things, it's still considered to be a valid deed, because the only things that need to be in place for it to be valid is this one, right? These 7. Let's look at the ones that are non-essential. In order for it to be a valid deed, none of these matter, but they're all a good idea, and most deeds have all of them. So the test question is you're going to be required to know the difference. Whether that's coming up with an acronym, which looking at these letters, you might have to get kind of creative to come up with, but a lot of them are just common sense, right? Be in writing, legal capacity, identify the parties, identify the property. Words of conveyance, a little confusing, but it does make sense. Have in there what you're doing with it. Don't just have a list of people's names and that's it. What are they wanting to do with this thing? So all of these are pretty commonsensical. Here's what are the non-essential elements of a deed. It's still a valid deed even if these are not there. To be dated. Dated is a good idea, but not required. It has nothing to do with making it a valid deed or not. To be witnessed by who? Witnessed by someone seeing you sign it or seeing the seller sign it. Not required. Recorded. Oh, wait a minute, Neil. You just said recorded was an essential element. This is the thing you're just going to have to use your gut strength and force it into your brain to remember the difference for the sake of passing the test. The deed being recorded does not affect its validity. It's still a valid deed even though it hasn't yet been recorded. But a few slides ago, we said it's not officially considered having been closed until it's recorded. True. So that's what you should take away from this. You don't have a successful closing, which means we can give away the money to the different people, like the brokers and the seller and the keys to the buyer. We can't do that until the deed gets recorded. So in North Carolina, when we get to the closing section, in North Carolina, a closing hasn't happened until the deed gets recorded. All we had up until that point, signing all the papers, that's called a settlement. All we did was have a settlement meeting. We didn't have a closing yet. Closing means deed got recorded. So remember, it may be using that logic. It's still a valid deed even though it hasn't been recorded. Does it get recorded? Yes. But the recording of it, just spazzed out there. The recording of it doesn't affect its validity. The only thing needed to be valid is that the deed gets delivered and voluntarily accepted. What else? The deed does not have to be notarized by a notary public. Anybody familiar? If you need a notary public, some official third party who can say, yep, I watched him sign it, and I'll stamp it and put my name on it, proving and attesting that I saw her sign it. That's a notary public. You pay them like $20. I think they can't just charge whatever they want to. Good places to get notary publics are at attorneys' offices, but also banks. Usually they'll have one on standby at any given moment. In other places, they have some that are freewheeling and they'll come to you or meet you at the Starbucks. But the deed does get notarized. It's just not required to make it a valid deed. It's still a valid deed, and even before it has been notarized. Why? Because all these things were done. This is the stuff that makes it valid. These are all great ideas, but they don't affect its validity. The exact amount of consideration. Well, we haven't gotten to the contract chapter yet, but what we will learn is that when you sell property, you are giving the property to someone in exchange for something of value. And that is what consideration is. Consideration is something of value. Usually it's money, right? Usually cash, check. It could be a herd of cows, could be goats. My favorite non-money thing of value are those herds of fainting goats. You ever seen fainting goats? Loud noise happens and they paralyze up and fall over for a few minutes. Never saw a transaction with them, but it would be wonderful. So the exact amount of consideration is not required to be on the deed for it to be a valid deed. The word sealed. Okay, another weird thing. Once upon a time, if only Game of Thrones were actual history, right? That era, that medieval time back in the day, when somebody wanted to write a letter to someone else, there was no postal service like we know it today. There were no envelopes. What did they do? They rolled it up in a scroll. They melted hot wax on the scroll, and they dipped their signet ring in there. And that's how the receiver of the document knew that no one had read what was inside, because the seal was intact. Well, that evolved into, no, let's not mess with wax anymore. But there for a while, you might have a few documents in your files that actually have the word seal in parentheses next to where you signed it. So it kind of morphed into that thing. And you'll still see it from time to time, but it's not a requirement. It having been sealed, having the word seal doesn't affect its validity. And then finally, as we already saw, the buyer, the grantee, does not have to sign it. That doesn't affect its validity. They're not going to sign it anyway. So reword it in your brain that these non-essential elements have no standing on making the deed valid or not. The things that make this deed valid are these 7. The parties have weird names we already addressed. The grantor is the seller, the one who's giving it. The grantee is the buyer, the one who's getting it. We're going to see OR words and EE words like leaseor. It's the one who is the landlord, the owner who's renting the property, and leasee is the one who's renting it from them, the paying it, the tenant, right? And here's that list. We've got, when it comes to a deed, the grantor is the giver, the grantee is the receiver. When it comes to an offer, the buyer is the one making the offer, the offeror initially, and the seller is typically the offeree. But then the seller might not like the offer, and they might want to make a counteroffer. In that case, when it's a counteroffer, the seller becomes the offeror. OR, buyer becomes the one receiving that counteroffer, the EE, offeree. There's the lease, leaseor, leasee. Mortgage, that can be a confusing one. And this is not something, this is just sort of a heads up. We're going to see these words in future chapters. I'm just pointing out the commonality of the OR words versus the EE words. But when it comes to a mortgage, what is a mortgage after all? It's the document that the borrower signs promising that if they don't live up to their promise of paying the payments on time, that they will agree that the bank can take the property. They're putting up the property as collateral. If you go in a pawn shop, all those items are because somebody came in and borrowed money and put up that watch to borrow the money, and maybe they never even came back to collect the watch and pay to get it back out because they needed the money too much. Not all of them, but that's what some of those items are there for. But so the collateral, the property being put up as collateral for the loan, you just ask this lender to loan you $800,000 for a loan amount, they're going to want something in return. And you signing a document saying, yep, I agree that you get to take it from me if I don't live up to what I'm promising, paying you this amount of payment every month for this number of months. The one making the promise and putting up the collateral is the borrower. They're giving, and so they're the mortgagor. I have a feeling if I had not shown you this slide and I had said, tell me who is the mortgagor, the borrower or the lender, you might have joined me being wrong as I was when I first heard these words. So mortgagor just, for me, some reason sounds like the lender to me, but it's not, because it's the one giving the deed, one giving the property up as collateral if they fail to make their payment. So the lender's the one receiving that in that event, so they're the mortgagee. We'll get into options and contracts for deed later, but again, the OREE words follow suit. Okay, another kind of deep topic here. What kind of deed is it? And it breaks down to this. If you're a seller, let me say it this way. What if I own this property as a conventional life estate? Remember the parameters of that? How long do I get this property if I'm the life tenant and I don't have a fee simple absolute ownership. I just have a conventional life estate. What's the duration of my ownership of this property? For a life estate. Everybody's waiting for Alfred.
However long the person that granted it to you lives.
Well, sort of. However long the measuring life they have identified lives, right? So if it's a conventional life estate, it's me. It's as long as I live. If I want to sell you my property, but what I own is not fee simple absolute, but in fact a conventional life estate, do you want to know? Is that a detail that you would expect me to include and say, oh, by the way, once I die, you don't own this either because I can't sell you the full thing, the fee simple. I can only sell you what I have. And what I have is, it's going to be here as long as I'm alive. It's yours as long as I'm alive. I'm the measuring life. So wouldn't it be smart for that to be addressed? Yeah. So think of it with these types of deeds. The type of deed has to do with, is the seller willing and able to stand behind the deed itself? When I give you a property or sell you a property that's a general warranty deed, I am defending the title. I'm saying, look, I'm so confident that this is a good, solid, clear title that if anybody else comes along and claims that they own some portion of it and gives you trouble in the future, I will come there and fix it and help you resolve it and beat the guy up. No, not that. But general warranty deed is saying the grantor, seller, owner that you're buying it from will defend the title against any sort of claims against it now and forever. And in the past too. I've looked into the past and nothing from back then affects your ownership, Mr. Buyer. I'm selling it to you. So I'll give you a general warranty deed. In fact, it includes 5 promises, 5 guarantees. General warranty deed is the best kind. And again, if I took these definitions off this slide and made you prioritize these, I know I would have, if I didn't know better, I'd probably put special warranty first because special sounds more important than general. Sometimes the memory aid in some of these ridiculous terms is the opposite. This is going to be one of those times you're going to have to think, oh yeah, this is the opposite of the way it seems like it should be. So a general warranty deed is better than a special warranty deed because with a special warranty deed, the grantor seller is defending it only for the time that they owned it themselves. They're like, there were 5 other owners before me, and if I give it to you as a general warranty deed, I'm promising that all of those, that whole duration of 80 some years is all cleared up. There's not going to be any problems that any of those turkeys created against this property. That would be a general warranty deed. But if I'm not willing to sign my name to that and promise that every minute of ownership before me didn't result in something that could come back and haunt you, then all I would be able to give you is a special warranty deed because I'm only going to defend it for the time that I was the owner. One example out in the real world where you see a special warranty deed pretty much every time is when you buy a foreclosed home from a bank. When the bank forecloses on a property, now they own that property, right? Well, if it turns out that they buy the property back through the foreclosure process, they own it. What's another term for real estate that is owned by banks? If only there could be like an initial, like an acronym for real estate owned. Oh, let's see. What could we call it? Real estate owned, REO. Wait, has that been used before? REO properties. I'm being silly. REO property. You ever seen the term REO property? That means real estate owned by banks. So when you buy an REO property, it's property that has been repossessed, basically. It's like if you buy a car that has been repossessed. So it's a house. It's property that's been repossessed because the bank took it back. Well, when they sell one of those, you better believe a bank is not going to defend something any longer than they have to. They're all business. So they're going to say, look, we had trouble here. Obviously the owner we had to take this back from lost it to us. We had to take it back from them because they didn't live up to their end of the bargain. They didn't pay the mortgage. And so we don't know what went on back in the past. So we're only going to defend this property and stand behind this deed for these last 9, 10, 12 months that we actually took it back and owned it. So you're not getting a general warranty deed when you buy a bank-owned property. You're only going to get a special warranty deed. It's usually fine, but we just have to make sure that that's the phrase that's in there, that's in the contract. Selling it to you as a special warranty deed. It won't say I'm selling it to you as a general warranty deed. And when we see the actual deed, where did it go? There it is. Instead of general warranty deed, it's going to say North Carolina special warranty deed. There's several other kinds of deeds. Whatever the type is, obviously, will be swapped out and put in that location. Okay. There are others. The quitclaim deed, also known as a bargain and sale deed, means, hey, we're not warrantying anything. We'll sign the property over to you if you give us the money that we want, but I'm not defending the title against anybody for any amount of time. No title warranties. Does it mean it's a bad title? No, it's still good, but it just means the seller is signing over a deed that's got no warranties attached to it. What do I mean by warranties? Here's the best kind. The general warranty deed is saying the seller guarantees the title from forever ago to forever in the future. 100% guarantee. That's the best way to get a property from somebody. Any claims against it, they'll stand behind. They'll help you resolve them, get to the bottom of them, and clear it up. They'll help you get that title clear. What if they're dead? What if it happens 15 years after you own it and that seller you bought it from who gave you this general warranty deed, you track them down and they end up having died 3 years earlier or they're broke. Then they're not dead, but they got no money to help you fix this issue and pay for something to get resolved. That's where title insurance comes in. If the seller you bought it from, the grantor you got the deed from, turns out to be dead or insolvent, broke, then the title insurance policy that you had the attorney get for you and put on the property and pay for just the one time, by the way, buyer pays for the title insurance just one time. It's not a recurring monthly amount. We'll talk more about that in a minute. That's going to kick in. But a general warranty deed has these 5 guarantees or 5 covenants. The covenant of Seizen. Now we're getting into some silly old words again. Seizen, goes back to like the medieval times again. So think about some couple of guys dressed up in those outfits where they wear the pants that stop at your knees, and then you have the socks and the shoes, and they look ridiculous. And they're standing on a hilltop looking out across acres and acres of land. And one of them is the seller and the other one is the buyer. So this concept of Seizen is like the seller pointing out, hey, from over there at the trees to over there at the river and all the way to the distance where that field is, this is mine and this is what I'm selling you. So Seizen is, this is what I own and what I'm selling to you in this process. That's the covenant of Seizen, identifying the property that you're selling. Encumbrances, covenant of encumbrances says, hey, when I sell it to you, nothing that I've done that could create a lien against the property will convey to you. You won't be inheriting any liens with this property. If there are liens on it, in order to sell it as a general warranty deed, the seller's going to have to fix them, clear them up, pay them, because the buyer can't get you can't give them a general warranty deed if it does have liens against it. By the way, let me pause. Can you sell property to somebody that has liens against it? Is that legal? Is that a possibility? Is that doable?
Yes.
Yeah, we can. We learned that already. So if we're selling property that has liens against it, is that going to be a general warranty deed? If one of the provisions of a general warranty deed is that it be free from liens. So
No, it's not.
exactly. It's going to be a special warranty deed probably, or some other kind. Another one is quiet enjoyment. That's not about noise levels and radios being loud. This is about third-party claims. Some other person coming along and saying, yeah, I'm a 10% owner in that. You can't sell that without my permission. You're saying there's not going to be any of that nonsense. I promise. Quiet enjoyment means no third parties will come along and try to mess things up and claim ownership. That seller is guaranteeing that as well. They're also guaranteeing further assurance. Yeah, I'll help you track down information later. If something comes up later, I'm so sure it won't, that if it does, I promise to help you fix it. And then forever, warrantying these things forever, even after the sale is done. That's where the title insurance needs to kick in. The owner's saying, look, even once the sale is done, come find me. I'll fix it. But what if you go find them again and they're dead? They're broke. They can't fix it. Well, the title policy will be there for that. And they'll kick in for that. Special warranty deed. It's only two of those guarantees. The seller's only guaranteeing for the amount of time that they actually owned it. They're not guaranteeing back in the past forever. They're not guaranteeing anything but that. Just the amount of time they owned it, like the bank selling an REO property. If it's a quick claim deed, the seller's not making any guarantees at all. They may or may not have claim to the title at all. You're just going to have to be happy with this quick claim deed. And it's just limited. It's less than either of those other two. A bargain and sale deed means no guarantees are included. They do have a claim to the title. Compare the two. With a quick claim deed, they might not. They might, but they might not have a claim to the title. With a bargain and sale, they do have a claim to the title. And they use this kind when they're clearing up a title cloud. A title cloud might also be used like in a divorce situation to sign over the deed from one spouse to the one who's keeping the property. Then we've got a variety of others. A correction deed. We saw that on one of the slides. A correction deed is in place to fix mistakes. Oh no, we saw that on the tax record. A reference to that, to the deed that we could find if we looked at the book and page, it was a correction deed. A gift deed is what you would use if you're not selling it, but you're giving it away for free to somebody. But here's a note. Here's a little warning. When and if you receive property as a gift from somebody, make sure you take that gift deed to the Register of Deeds immediately and record it within 2 years, or they can take it back. They can take that gift back. So get it recorded so they can't take it back from you. A release deed is something that we use when all the mortgage payments have been paid. It's like back in the day, I heard of people burning the mortgage. Once they pay that last payment, 30 years, 360 payments, they'll have a celebration bonfire and burn the loan documents, burn the mortgage, a mortgage burning party. Well, the release deed is the thing that says, hey, you've paid everything. You don't owe us at all anymore. You paid all 360 payments on a 30-year loan. If it's a court-ordered transfer of property, it's going to be a trustee's deed or a sheriff's deed for a judgment or foreclosure kind of thing. There's a tax deed for similar situations, and those are the kinds of deeds. So, what are 3 types of deeds a grantor might use to transfer property? What are 3 of those last several kinds of deeds we looked at?
General, special warranty, and quick claim.
Perfect. What if somebody dies without a will? What is it called when they die without a will?
Intestate.
Well, who gets their stuff if they have no will and no heirs to leave anything to?
State of North Carolina.
There you go. So, first step, somebody dies, they're going to check to see if they can find a will somewhere. If there's no will, they're going to start asking questions. The authorities, hey, who is this person related to? Wait, they had no spouse, they had no kids, their parents are dead, they have no brothers and sisters. It's getting kind of depressing, right? They're going to track down all the lineage of any sort of potential heir. It would be like children, parents, siblings, and then it's like aunts, uncles, that kind of thing, out and out and out and out. If they just can't find anybody, then the sheet kicks in. All right, another little bit of math, probably the easiest math you'll do, and it is the tax for the privilege of selling your property. Congratulations, you have the privilege of selling your property. That's some right you have to do with the property what you will, and if you choose to sell it, somebody's got to pay the taxes. Not the taxes we just calculated. This is a different kind of tax. This is basically a sales tax. So when you sell something, you got to pay a tax for selling it. And it's called excise tax. It's also known as deed stamps or revenue stamps or tax stamps. The stamps thing comes from once upon a time in the past. On that deed, as part of the recording process, they'd take it to the register of deeds, and that clerk would literally say, how much was it? Oh, it was $300,000. Okay, that's going to be this many stamps. Give me money. And once you pay them the money, they would stick the physical stamps signifying that you paid the excise tax or the revenue stamps. So that's why they call it stamps, but we don't do stamps anymore. So what does the math look like? It's a simple formula that's $1 for every $500 of something. Be careful. It is not based on the assessed value. So even though we're talking about a tax, it's not the same thing as the real estate taxes, not the property taxes. This is excise tax, and it's based on the purchase price. And if you internalize the thing I mentioned a minute ago, that it's a sales tax, basically, then if you want to be a pessimistic conspiracy theorist about the government, which I like to do in my spare time, just for fun, then of course they're going to charge you on the bigger amount. The government's not going to charge you the sales tax on tax value. They're going to charge it on the bigger amount, which is the purchase price, right? So $1 per 500 of sales price. Let's see how we do the math. We've got excise tax. Think of it as sales tax. It'll say the property sold for $325,135. The assessed value is 70% of that. How much will be collected for excise tax? Let me just give you a minute to work on that, and then we'll talk through it. Oh, by the way, let me recap. It's $1 per $500. That's the formula for it. There's no reason in the world that I expect you to get this. But I think by struggling with it for a minute, it'll probably stick in your brain better once I tell you how to do it. So give me that 1 minute of struggle and I'll reveal it. Okay, I'm going to go easy. Does this matter? Assessed value is no part of this at all. So forget that. Does the sale price matter? Yeah, because it's a sales tax. So how do we do this? 325, 135. If it's $1 per 500, then we need to, is there such a thing as a $500 bill? I don't know. Let's pretend there is. How many $500 bills would there be in this price? Well, take that price, 325, 135, and divide it by the number 500. So here's how we could write it up as a formula. The sale price on the top, the $500 on the bottom, and then the revenues. Oops, there I am using it. Let me use the different term. I'm a dinosaur, guys. It's been 28 years. So sometimes I'll use the old terms because when I learned it, it was revenue stamps. So 325, 135 goes on top. We're dividing it by 500. What do we get? We got $6.50 and 27 cents. So it's just the price divided by the number 500. But we're not finished, because I'm going to pile on to the government and just really make them the jerk in the situation. Here's the other thing you need to know, especially about excise tax. The government doesn't want your change. They want your paper. They want the folding money. So since it's any kind of cents at all, round up. So the excise tax is going to be $651. Step 1, divide the sale price by 500. Step 2, round up to the next folding money dollar, not any sort of change. And that's it. Let me show you something. Let me show it to you in a prettier format. So 2 ways. The rounding thing can happen in 2 different ways. I showed you my favorite. Yeah, always round it up. Exactly. I showed you the one on the right. So I showed you method 2. And in this case, we've got a sale price of $321,457 divided by 500 to get 642.914. And so in this case, we would round up to 643. What you could have also done is method 1. You can do the rounding sooner. So take that sale price and round to the closest 500, or the nearest up, round up to the next 500. So in this case, we'd round 321,457 up to 321,500 even, and then divide that by $500. And it's going to give you the exact 643. So both of them get to the same answer, but for some reason, I find it easier as a memory aid. Oh yeah, I see change there. I need to turn that into more dollars. So rounding up to the 643 just clicks in my brain better. You do you. Whichever one makes better sense, just do it that way every time. We okay there? Property sold for $793,618. The buyer purchased the property with a loan in the amount of $650,000. How much will North Carolina charge the buyer for excise tax? And how much will North Carolina charge the seller for excise tax? So we've got our property sale price. we're going to divide it by 500, ignore the loan amount. That was just a distraction, a decoy. And so the next question is, who has to pay excise tax? I didn't tell you that yet. And the short answer, well, the answer for this class is the standard contract 2T says the seller pays it. So by default, they'll probably just go along with that, the seller paying it, because of the standard contract having it built in that way. But it is not like a requirement. It's not like a law or anything. When you buy new construction, that builder, I don't know if I've mentioned this to you, the standard contract 2T that we look at is 16 pages. If you buy new construction from a builder, they pay an attorney to write up their own version of the contract. And it's probably way more than 16 pages, by the way. It might be 80, 90, 100 some pages. Part of that is they're going to make that contract very much in their own favor because they're the ones having it drawn up. And one of the things that they usually do is put in the contract that the buyer pays the excise tax. So when it's new construction, almost everyone I've ever seen, they slide it over to the buyer side. But for your purposes for this class, unless they specifically say that, the seller pays it. As a tradition, the seller's going to pay excise tax. It's officially it's basically negotiable, but usually if we're using a standard contract, I don't usually see people arguing about it. I don't usually see sellers counter offering a deal and saying, yeah, I'll take this, but only if you pay excise tax. It's sort of a non-issue. So this was also a dirty trick. How much will North Carolina charge the buyer for excise tax? Well, basically nothing. Buyer's not paying it. How much will they charge the seller? That's $793,618 divided by 500 is $1,587 and some change, rounds up to $1,588. Let's see. Let me give you one to do, and then we'll call it, and we'll come back tomorrow. So, real quick, though. We've got a price. Oops. We got a sales price. I won't even give you the nonsense of a loan amount or any of that. Of $737,737. What a ridiculous price. How much is excise tax on this sale price? $737,737.
$1,476.
It's going to sit on the top of that T, so we can just draw the T right under it. All we got to do is divide. And I'm sure you're right. 1475 and some change. 1476. By the way, what if it was 737 even? 737,000 even. Oh, look, no change at all. So when it's even or 500, then you don't have to do any rounding. It's already just to the dollar, right? So pretty simple. We come back tomorrow. We'll get into that whole title insurance thing I've been talking about. Oh, wait, here it is. Nope, it's there. We'll get into title insurance, the process of the title search, all that fun stuff. So have a great night. I'll see you tomorrow.